beneath the shifting sands, deep within jungles, or standing silent against windswept cliffs, the ruins of our ancestors endure. Stones weathered by centuries still whisper of forgotten hands that carved them, civilizations whose names are barely remembered, and purposes that remain uncertain even to the most devoted scholars. History leaves us monuments of power and beauty, but it also leaves behind shadows, places where the echoes of the past stir unease rather than awe. Across the ancient world, there are ruins that do not inspire reverence, but rather disquiet. Sites where architecture bends toward the strange, where rituals leave unsettling traces, and where the weight of the unknown presses heavily on the imagination. Were these structures warnings, sanctuaries, prisons, or something else entirely? Some ruins hint at practices long abandoned. Others defy the tools and logic available to those who supposedly built them. Their walls carry scars of fire, sacrifice, and mystery, raising questions that history books cannot easily answer. Tonight, we step carefully into these landscapes of silence and stone. This is not merely a journey through history's grandeur, but through its darker corners. Welcome to the most disturbing ancient ruins ever found. Section 2. The city beneath the black seawater does not forget. It covers, it conceals, it preserves. But beneath the surface, it remembers. Every ripple, every drowned stone is a syllable in the sentence of a buried world. And once, that world breathed above the waves. Once, it was dry land, mapped, walked, known. Then, silence. Near the coast of Bulgaria, in the deep cradle of the Black Sea, lies a forgotten shoreline. Not myth, not theory, but a coastline, sunken, intact, with stairways descending into nothing, walls swallowed whole, cities suspended in time. Beneath 300 feet of salt and memory, this is not a fable. This is Rapatimo, and just beyond it, Kiten. Here, divers do not find debris, they find design. They find stone arranged in perfect angles, fragments of sacred geometry etched into the floor of a vanished world. These were not camps. These were not mere fishing villages. They were organized, aligned, ceremonial. Civilization, not in seed form, but in full bloom, submerged. Something happened 7,500 years ago. Something violent, sudden, permanent. Geologists call it the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. They say that the rising waters of the Mediterranean crashed through the Bosporus, straight with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. Every second, the Black Sea, once a freshwater lake, was devoured, its shores flooded, its people scattered, its memory fractured. But what if the deluge wasn't the beginning of disaster? What if it was the last gasp of something older? Not a drowning, but a burial. The myth of a great flood is not regional, it is planetary. The Sumerians called it the deluge, a punishment for forgotten laws. The Greeks said Zeus sent it to end the age of bronze. The Hindus speak of Manu, warned by a fish to build a ship. The Maya remembered 4 destroyed suns, each swallowed by water and flame. The Black Sea may not be the origin of these stories, but it may be one of the wounds that preserved them. A regional flood. Yes, but perhaps one echo in a long chain of drownings meant to cut us off from something we were not meant to carry forward. Because when we examine the ruins of Ropatamo and Kitten, we do not find primitive disorder. We find intelligence, stones aligned with solstice shadows, curved foundations resonant with sound, artifacts not of survival, but of ceremony, as if these cities were not just built, but anointed, as if the people who lived there had knowledge of something we no longer understand, the rhythms of the sky, the sacredness of shape, the symphony of stone and water and star. But it's not just the ruins that whisper, it's the depth. The distance to be submerged under 300 feet of water is not a slow, passive sinking. It's not erosion, it is cataclysm. And cataclysms leave questions behind, not just about geology, but about memory. Why do we know so little of this place? Why is its story not shouted from every academic tower? Why silence? Some say the people of Ropatamo fled. Others say they were taken. But all that remains is a city no longer reachable by foot. A sacred place turned into a mausoleum for truths we never knew we had. And perhaps that was the point. Because the more we find beneath the Black Sea, the more familiar it feels. The alignment of stones, the mathematical codes, the symbols that reappear in Egypt, in Sumer, in Anatolia, as if all these cultures sprang from the same drowned seed, a global inheritance, split apart by water, translated by trauma. We speak of Mesopotamia as the cradle. But what if the Black Sea was the womb? What if the priests of Sumer, the architects of Egypt, the stargazers of the Indus, were all descendants of the same scattering, children of the deluge, haunted by fragments, trying to recreate the pattern of something lost beneath the tides? Today, the Black Sea is still expanding, still eating away at the edges, still holding its secrets in the dark. But the stones are surfacing, the divers are returning, and the silence is starting to thin. What if civilization is not a ladder, but a spiral? What if it rises only to fall, only to rise again, not forward, but deeper, not progress, but recursion, not evolution, but remembrance? The cities beneath the Black Sea were not the first, they were echoes. They were the children of an even older fire, one whose name we've lost, one whose light still flickers beneath the weight of salt and silt and forgetting. We are taught that history began in writing, but writing only remembers what it is allowed to see. And water, unlike paper, does not burn, it buries. And so the question lingers, unspoken yet persistent. Did we rise from the flood, or fall into it? Did we build the world we know upon the bones of a forgotten one? And if the Black Sea once held the heart of that world, what still sleeps beneath its waves? Section 3. The melted temples of Puma Punku stone is not supposed to flow. It is the language of permanence, the earth's memory frozen in place. And yet, in the high plains of Bolivia, there is a place where stone bends like wax, burns like flesh, and bleeds like it was once alive. Puma Punku is not a ruin, it is a riddle, a fracture in the laws of ancient architecture, a site so old, so violently broken, that even time struggles to make sense of it. It sits 12,800 feet above sea level, at the heart of the Andean Altiplano, exposed to wind, sky, and cosmic silence, and what it holds should not be there. Here lie blocks of diorite and andesite, stones harder than steel, stones that modern diamond tools struggle to shape. but they were carved with perfection. Angular H-shapes with matching notches, fitted so precisely that a razor blade could not slip between. Symmetry that modern builders admire and cannot replicate. Not at this altitude, not with these materials, not with the copper tools of the pre-Incan age. Who built Puma Punku, and what happened to them? Because what shocks archaeologists is not just the precision, it's the damage. Many of the stones appear to have been tossed, shattered, like children's blocks after a cosmic tantrum. But others look burned, melted, vitrification, a process where stone is heated until it fuses, blisters, warps, or turns to glass. This does not happen in nature without immense, focused heat, and certainly not at this scale. Yet, at Puma Punku, some stones show signs of sudden surface melting, as if exposed to a blast of energy that should not exist in any ancient toolkit. What kind of fire melts stone on a mountaintop? This is where the myths return, whispers passed down from the Aymara people and echoed in the stories of Viracocha, the creator god of the Andes. He came in a time before time, walking across the earth after a great flood, rebuilding the world. With the knowledge of the stars, he taught the use of fire and stone. He vanished in the direction of the sea, and he left behind something sacred or something forbidden, something that others would come to destroy, because the destruction of Puma Punku does not feel like decay. It feels surgical, deliberate. The stones were not worn down, they were torn apart. Some were splintered from within, as if pressure had built inside them and exploded outward. Others show signs of explosive displacement, tossed hundreds of feet, embedded into strange positions. This was not the slow hand of erosion. It was an event, a violent act, a purge. What if this wasn't just destruction, but containment? What if something had to be ended here? A technology sealed, a knowledge removed, a civilization deleted. What if fire was the lock? We are told the site dates to around 536 AD, but beneath the surface, beneath the guesswork, carbon samples and sediment records whisper a different date, closer to 12,000 years ago, right at the end of the Younger Dryas, right at the global moment of extinction and flood. When the mammoths vanished, when the glaciers bled, when something passed over the earth and turned everything to ash, could it be that Puma Punku predates the Incas, the Tiwanaku, even the Sumerians? That it was a node in an older network, a power station, a resonance hub, a cosmic altar? Its precision hints at purpose, its layout echoes vibration. Its damage screams trauma. The sacred geometry is not decorative, it's functional. The alignments, not random. These are not ruins. These are remains. And then there is the magnetism. Some blocks, when tested, show localized magnetic anomalies, as if the stone had once been exposed to a field, an energy that altered its internal structure. Why would a temple need to store electromagnetic charge? Why would it require conductivity? Why build such perfection so far from any quarry or city? Unless it wasn't meant for worship. Unless it was meant for something else. There are ruins around the world that hide, that whisper, that decay slowly under layers of soil and denial. But Puma Punku does not hide. It stares directly into the sun, as if daring us to see what was done to it. to see what we're not meant to remember. And still, no one can answer the core question: how? How were these stones cut with surgical precision? How were they moved, weighing 100 tons, across terrain impossible even for modern cranes? And most of all, how were they melted? Unless they weren't, unless something else, not fire, not tool, some force or weapon was used here, one we no longer possess, one we are no longer meant to possess. Maybe Puma Punku was never meant to survive. Maybe it was a warning, caught in the act of being erased, a temple of fire turned into a grave of light. We look at its broken angles and wonder, was this the aftermath of divine wrath, or the result of human betrayal? Did the gods destroy it, or did we? And if we did, what were we trying to hide from ourselves? In the wind-scoured plains of Bolivia, the stones still hum, still bleed, still hold the memory of what was once pure, once dangerous, once divine. They call it a ruin. But sometimes ruins are tombs for truths too radiant to survive. And sometimes they are beginnings. Section 4. Göbekli Tepe wasn't the first, they told us. History began in stone. That once we learned to carve symbols, raise pillars, and organize ritual, we became human. They said it all started at Göbekli Tepe, the first temple, the first myth, the first memory. But what if the first was just the first to survive? What if Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning, but a relic of something deeper? Not the spark, but the echo, beneath the dust of Anatolia. The stones do not speak, they remember. Across the southeastern plains of modern-day Turkey, a constellation of sacred sites is now emerging from the earth like forgotten stars. Ta Tepler, Karahan Tepe, Sefer Tepe, Harbitsuvan Tepe, and others, each revealing carved enclosures, strange motifs, and stone circles older than agriculture, older than metallurgy, older than civilization as we were taught to define it. Each one predates Mesopotamia. Each one violates the timeline. Each one was buried intentionally. Karahan Tepe rests just 35 kilometers southeast of its more famous sibling. But it is no mere shadow. Here, carved T-shaped pillars rise from subterranean chambers. Here, stone heads stare upward from pits, their eyes hollow with time. Here, an enclosure curves inwards like a birth canal or a grave dot, and beneath it, all a single human-sized shaft drilled straight into the bedrock. So smooth, so exact, so out of place, it is not a well, it is not a tomb, it is unknown. Some archaeologists call this the origin of belief, but the belief feels too formed, too symmetrical, too deliberate. What if this wasn't the origin of faith, but the last shrine of remembrance? What if these people didn't discover the sacred, they inherited it from someone else? The pillars of Karahan and Göbekli Tepe are twins in silence. Both bear animals. Both are arranged in circles. Both aligned to stars. The vulture, the serpent, the scorpion, the fox. Not decorations, but messages. Cosmic memories, encoded in stone. And though no written language was found, the symbols carry the weight of warning. One relief shows a headless figure. Another, a scorpion beside a downward-facing creature. To the untrained eye, it's art. To the sky watcher, it's a zodiac. To the descendant, it's a story of flood, of fire, of forgetting. The carbon dates tell us these sites are over 11,000 years old, built at the end of the Younger Dryas, just after the last ice age collapsed, just after something struck the northern hemisphere and melted the world. Some call it a comet, others an axis shift, others still a judgment. Whatever it was, it forced a reset, and in the aftermath, someone built stone circles to remember the before. But here's the question they never answer: why bury it? Why would a civilization spend generations carving perfect enclosures, aligning them to constellations, adorning them with sacred animals and mythic shapes, only to fill them with dirt? Why seal what they had just built? Unless the purpose was never ritual, unless the burial was the ritual. What if these sites are not just temples, but time capsules? Messages not meant for their age, but for ours, buried during an age of chaos, preserved through catastrophe, revealed now in an age of forgetting. Mainstream historians admit it now. Something is off. Göbekli Tepe and its siblings were not developed in isolation. They arose suddenly, with no gradual learning curve, no primitive stages, fully formed, fully aligned, fully sacred. This is not evolution. This is inheritance. And if this was passed down, who passed it? Across the world, we see the same pattern: circles of stone, celestial alignments, burials beneath dot, from Nabta Playa in Egypt to the stone rings of Britain, to the sunken sanctuaries in Peru and Japan. This memory repeats. Before history, there was something else: a people, a priesthood, a science, not primitive, but different, not modern, but knowing. And they left behind fragments, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered. Perhaps we were meant to forget. Perhaps it was too dangerous to know, because to know the truth of our past is to question the truth of our present, to remember that we are not the pinnacle, we are the survivors, the inheritors of fire we no longer understand. Göbekli Tepe was buried under 10,000 years of silence. But silence does not mean absence. Silence is a strategy, a spell, and now, as the earth opens, and dust is brushed from the eyes of stone gods, we must ask, why now? Why are these memories returning now? It's easy to say Göbekli Tepe was first. It fits the story. It gives us a clean origin. But clean stories are rarely true, and beginnings are rarely the beginning. Section 5. The Cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuamán are stones. And then there are the stones of the old world, not cut, not moved, but summoned, as if the mountain itself stood up and rearranged its body into walls. They say gods once walked in Peru, that lightning had fingers, and the stones obeyed. At Sacsayhuamán, that myth never left. It simply turned to stone, high above the sacred city of Cusco, where the air thins and breath becomes prayer. The walls rise, not vertically, but primordally, that do not stand. They coil, they lean, they nestle as if each block was born in relation to the next dot. No mortar, no symmetry, no plan, yet perfection. Some of these stones weigh over 300 tons, carved with 12, 13, 14 angles, each edge locked with another. Not even a razor blade can slip between them. The Incas revered the site, but they did not build it. Even they whispered of a people before giants, sky beings, the Viracocha. They named them in myth, but found no trace in record. Only the stones remained. And stones do not lie. Modern engineers stand at Sacsayhuamán and blink. They see the weight, the slope, the fitted seams, and they cannot explain it. No pulleys, no wheels, no steel tools. The site rests 3,700 meters above sea level. No forests for timber, no quarries nearby, yet somehow someone shaped and placed stone upon stone with surgical devotion. It would take cranes today. It would take blueprints. It would take technologies we still refine. But this was built in the silence of the pre-Columbian night, long before the Incas, long before the Spanish, long before the textbooks dare look, and still the stones resist time. Earthquakes have shattered cathedrals, leveled cities, but these walls remain, not cracked, not bowed, just watching. Because this isn't architecture, it's memory, encoded in mass, encoded in fit, encoded in impossibility. The local Quechua believe lightning helped build Sacsayhuamán, that stones softened in divine fire, or sang when touched. They say the stones were alive, and when you walk alongside them, not just observing, but listening, you begin to wonder, because there is an energy here, not just presence, but pressure, a thrum in the ground, like the heartbeat of something dreaming. Archaeologists classify the method as polygonal masonry. But classification is not understanding. And so we classify what we cannot replicate. It's easier than asking, who knew how to do this, and why don't we? The great stones curve like muscle. They feel organic, not mechanical. Each one was shaped to accommodate the ones around it, as if the builder could see 1,000 angles ahead. No two stones are the same, and yet they harmonize like a hymn carved in basalt. This was not construction. This was communion. Legends in the Andes speak of the Inca, a time before time, when the world was soft and stone obeyed. They speak of the Waris, giants, children of the sun, who shaped the land with thought and vanished into mist. Some claim the original walls of Sacsayhuamán were not even built. They were revealed, already present, already sacred, already watching. And here lies the fracture in our history. Because the deeper you dig into sites like this, the more the timeline bends. We date the Incan use of the site to the 15th century, but the stones themselves, they do not date. Carbon cannot cling to them. Scripts cannot label them. Tools cannot explain them. So we pretend. We assign estimates. We say probably. We say maybe. Because to admit we don't know is to unravel the whole narrative. What if these walls are not Incan, not even pre-Incan? What if they are remnants of a civilization erased, a knowledge lost, a technology we misname as myth? Across the world, similar stones whisper the same story at Ollantaytambo, at Baalbek, at Petra, at Hattusa. Cyclopean walls, massive blocks, perfect fit, zero explanation. Is this convergence or memory? The word Cyclopean comes from Greece, named after the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who forged thunderbolts and architecture alike. But what if the myth was born from distant memory? What if the giants were not literal, but symbolic of knowledge vast enough to lift mountains? Knowledge not written, but built, in code, in fit, in stone. The stones of Sacsayhuamán are not passive. They pull something from you, an ancestral ache, a discomfort, a desire to know what was lost. They hold the silence of collapse, the stillness of an age that did not fade but fell. And yet There is something else beneath the awe, a question unasked. Why? Why build something so impossible, only to leave no record, no script, no name, no trace of the hand that carved, unless the point wasn't to last 1,000 years, but 10,000, unless the wall wasn't built for its time, but for ours, a warning, in stone. Maybe they knew what would come, that fire would fall, that memory would burn, that all which is soft would vanish, but stone would remain. And so they wrote their scripture in weight, in silence, in shadow. You can touch the wall, feel the cold, trace the impossible seam, but you will never find a signature, because the builders are not waiting to be named. They are waiting to be remembered. And if these stones could speak, they wouldn't answer. They would ask. Section 6. Eridu, the first city, before memory, before empire. Before even the whisper of names, there was Eridu, a city that was not born from the earth, but descended from the heavens, not raised by hands, but revealed by command, in the oldest tablets of Sumer, where cuneiform bites into clay like fossilized breath. Eridu is named first, not just first in order, but first in meaning. They lowered kingship from heaven to Eridu. This is the line, the origin point of civilization, as told not by legend, but by record. The Sumerians did not speak of beginnings as invention, but as restoration. Something fell from the sky, something sacred, and the first city rose to meet it. We call them myths now, tales of the Apkallu, 7 radiant sages sent by the gods to teach mankind how to live. They were not men, they were not beasts, they were something in between, hybrid intelligences, draped in feathers and wisdom, bearing tablets, not swords. They taught writing, mathematics, law, the building of temples, the measurement of the stars. They walked among us, not as conquerors, but as restorers, carving light back into a world that had already fallen once before. Beneath the ziggurats of Eridu, there are not just layers of mud and brick, but echoes. 17 layers of construction have been uncovered, not scattered, not chaotic, but stacked, one atop the other, as if someone kept trying to rebuild what kept getting washed away. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more the layers become primordial. Below the temples lie structures not matching any known style, artifacts with no clear purpose, stones where there should be none, and at the very bottom, traces of a culture not yet named. A silence so loud it shakes the ground, that king lists tell us Eridu reigned for tens of thousands of years, that Alulim, the first king, ruled for 28,800. We scoff, we moderns, we of the clock. But what if the number isn't a mistake? What if time once meant something else? What if rule was not counted in years, but in cycles? Cycles of knowledge, cycles of descent, cycles of light. The city sat where the Euphrates met the sea, a place of convergence, salt and fresh, heaven and earth, man and God. But it is gone now, not just buried, drowned. Even the Sumerians said it, that Eridu was abandoned, that it fell beneath the flood. The same flood echoed in every myth, the deluge, the reset, the silencing of the world. Why was Eridu left to sink? Why would the gods abandon the place they once sanctified? Or was it taken from them, not through war, but through forgetting? The myths say the Apkallu taught humanity, but also warned them, do not play God, do not break the balance. Do not become the thing you fear, But humanity did what it always does. It reached too far, and the waters answered. In some carvings, the Apkallu are shown holding cones, pine-shaped objects, pressed to the forehead. Some say these were offerings. Others say they were keys to memory, keys to awakening, to technologies not of metal and wheel, but of mind and resonance. Were these the gifts of Eridu, not towers or temples, but access? And if so, who closed the door? Some scholars now question whether Eridu was even a city in the sense we understand. No walls, no fortifications, just sacred platforms, canals, and mysterious chambers built to align with something unseen. A city built not to defend, but to receive. What kind of civilization builds for the sky? Satellite scans of the region show alignments not just with stars, but with other ancient sites, Uruk Nipper. Almost as if Eridu was the keystone, the harmonic center, the tuning fork of a greater design. And when it fell, so did the memory. There are ruins in Eridu that predate the invention of writing. And yet the myths say writing came from there. There are signs of organized planning. Before there were cities, there is a temple to Enki, god of water, built atop a place where no one should have known how to build. So we ask, again and again, was Eridu the beginning or just the first we remember? Because if Eridu was real, and it was, and if it was the origin, then everything else is downstream. Everything we call civilization is just an echo of that first vibration. The ziggurats of Babylon, the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of the Maya. They rise, not as innovations, but as reminders. Reminders of something once whole, now fragmented, scattered, hidden beneath the silt of denial, and still, the name remains, Eridu, like a soft drumbeat beneath the noise of history, not shouted, but whispered, a word that feels older than speech, older than dust, older than even gods. We look for Atlantis, we search for Lemuria, we imagine lost continents, but what if the first world was never lost, just renamed? What if Eridu was not the beginning, but the return? They say the Apkallu were banished after the flood, that only one survived, Oannes, the fishman sage, who emerged from the sea to reteach humanity what it had forgotten. He came at night, glowing, wrapped in scales and knowledge, not to conquer, but to remind. Perhaps Eridu is waiting for someone to remember again. And if kingship once descended from heaven, maybe it will again, not to rule, but to rebuild what once was sacred, what once was shared, what once was home. Section 7. The shadow beneath Nan Madol. Some ruins do not rise from mountains or deserts. Some do not echo with wind or ash. Some ruins sleep in the sea, built not to be remembered, but to be forgotten. And yet they remain off the eastern shore of Pohnpei, in the heart of the Pacific. There is a riddle built of stone and coral, Nan Madol, a city without streets, a labyrinth of basalt walls and tidal canals, a temple fortress floating above reef and memory. It is often called the Venice of the Pacific. But Venice has origins. Venice has records. Nan Madol has silence. 92 islets, each placed with unnatural precision. Basalt columns stacked like giant obsidian logs, interlocked without mortar, resting atop a shifting reef. How were they placed? How were they quarried? How were they moved? Some stones weigh over 50 tons, heavier than the blocks of Stonehenge, heavier than the columns of Karnak, and yet This was built without wheels, without beasts of burden, without iron, without explanation. There is no known quarry on Pohnpei. The basalt columns appear to have been transported from far inland across mountains, jungle, and water. Archaeologists propose bamboo rafts and great effort, but even that answer collapses under the weight. The reef alone would have shattered such attempts, unless the stones did not move in ways we understand. The oral histories of Pohnpei do not describe laborers. They speak of two brotherless and Alasip sorcerers from a far-off land. They say the brothers built Nan Madol in a single night, that they chanted, that they called upon forces beyond nature, and the stones flew into place, not rolled, not dragged, flown. To modern ears, it sounds like fantasy. But we forget, myth is often the last form memory takes before it breaks. The stories do not describe magic wands or fire-breathing gods. They describe technology so advanced it simply appeared to be magic. Why would two strangers build an ocean city on a reef that floods at high tide? Why would they arrange it in geometric perfection, ritual alignments, cardinal orientations, a sacred core surrounded by outer rings? Why would they place tombs at the center of it all? Unless Nan Madol was not a city, but a machine for containment, a temple not of worship, but of sealing. Even the locals feared it, called it sacred, cursed, refused to enter its inner sanctum, where the tombs of Soutler kings still sit sealed behind walls too high for the tide, and too old for the timeline. The Soutler dynasty came later, centuries later. By the time they ruled, Nan Madol was already ancient, and even they, those kings of stone, spoke of something older than themselves, of spirits beneath the sea, of forces that should not be awakened, of knowledge that was placed there, not to be found, but to be buried. Dive beneath the canals today, and you find layers of ruin that go deeper than coral should allow. Some walls are submerged well below sea level, and yet perfectly preserved, not eroded, not toppled, as if the sea rose after the building, as if something sank, not naturally, but by decision. What kind of civilization builds a sacred city on the edge of the world, and then lets it drown? What were they trying to hide or escape? There are no carvings of conquest here, no tributes to war, no celebration of empire, only stone, layered, impossibly balanced, silent. It is not the language of pride, but the architecture of memory. A memory someone tried to anchor beneath the waves. Look at the design. Long, narrow islets connected by ritual causeways. Each segment a chamber, each canal a vein. Nan Madol is not a village. It's not even a palace. It is a diagram, a stone circuit, a sacred code written across water. Some say it resembles a neural map, others a map of the stars. But both may be true. As above, so below. As within, so without. Satellite scans have revealed geometric patterns extending beyond the islets, submerged platforms, sunken alignments, a larger complex, now erased by coral and tide. A greater structure lost, but not gone. Were these landing pads, memory chambers, Atlantean libraries, or warnings? The priesthood of Nan Madol vanished without trace. The Soutlers vanished too, and no people have since claimed the place. Truly, locals say you must never sleep there, that the spirits of the builders still walk the tide, that lights rise from the stones at night, Some say those lights are electrical, others ancestral. Souls encoded in stone, waiting. The stones themselves are hexagonal, natural in form, but unnatural in precision. Basalt columns, almost crystalline, stacked like black bones in cyclopean fashion. They resist decay, they resist explanation, and they do not belong on a coral reef, unless the reef came after, unless the ocean rose to cover the secret. We think of Atlantis as a singular tragedy, but perhaps there were many. Perhaps Nan Madol was not an outlier, but a sister, a cousin, a remnant. One node in a global lattice, a sacred network of forgotten sanctuaries meant to preserve what the flood could not erase. They say the Spottler kings were cruel, but perhaps they weren't kings at all. Perhaps they were stewards, charged with guarding the gate, until they too were consumed, and now only silence remains. We study ruins, we date them, we measure their weight and origin, but we forget to ask, why were they placed this way? Why here? Why so heavy? Why at all? Unless the purpose was weight itself, to press something down, to keep something in. Perhaps Nan Madol was not built to be lived in. Perhaps it was built to be buried, to fall, to sleep, to wait, because beneath the canals, beneath the stone, beneath the whispering tide, there is still something breathing. Not a beast, not a myth, a memory. And memories do not drown, they rise. Maybe the tide is not rising out of nature, but out of necessity. Maybe something remembers what we were meant to forget. And if Nan Madol was truly sealed with sorcery, who cast the first spell, and what happens when it wears off? Section 8. Antarctica was not always ice. What if cold was not the beginning, but the veil? What if ice was not nature's course, but nature's defense? A glacial shroud drawn over something the earth did not want us to find. There are places on this planet where silence is not empty, but deliberate, and beneath the endless white of Antarctica, the silence thunders. They call it the last frontier, a continent buried under miles of ancient frost, hostile, inhospitable, uninhabitable. But the maps tell another story. Long before satellites, before compasses could brave the magnetic madness of the South Pole, there were maps. Maps that should not exist. The Piri race, map 1513, drawn on gazelle skin by an Ottoman admiral, using source material said to predate even Alexandria, and on it, Antarctica, not as a frozen wasteland, but as a green, mountainous coast, an ice-free outline of Queen Maud Land, drawn with uncanny precision, centuries before the first official sighting of the continent. How could anyone in the 1500s map terrain that has been under ice for thousands of years? Unless they weren't mapping it then, they were preserving a memory from a time when it wasn't frozen, geologists say. Antarctica has been under ice for at least 6 million years, but that number shifts like snow in a storm. And some data quietly with something far more recent. Ice cores show sudden shifts, flash freezing, something rapid, violent, and buried beneath it. Geometry. In 2016, satellite scans revealed anomalies deep under the Antarctic ice sheet. Massive structures, symmetrical, angular, too regular to be nature, too massive to ignore. Triangular patterns the size of city blocks, rectilinear forms buried beneath a mile of glacial silence. Immediately, the world turned away, dismissed them as natural formations. But the human eye knows pattern. We see what they pretend not to. If these are ruins, they are unlike anything we've known, larger than the pyramids, colder than the void of space, and untouched by human hands for epochs beyond counting. They are not broken by time, they are preserved by it, frozen not in death, but in exile. In 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd led Operation Hijump, a U.S. military expedition to Antarctica. Officially, it was for training. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. What they encountered remains classified. But Byrd spoke of vast, warm lakes, mountains without ice, and flying craft capable of impossible maneuvers. Then the mission was cut short, without explanation, without report, and for decades, Antarctica became a diplomatic no man's land, locked by international treaty, closed to exploration. What were they trying to protect or keep buried? Ancient lore speaks little of Antarctica by name, but it speaks of a world before the flood, of continents swallowed not by time, but by judgment. Atlantean memory does not end with Atlantis. It extends south to a polar kingdom lost in ice. The Egyptians called it Ta-Neter, land of the gods, a place of origin or exile, and the Sumerians, they spoke of a planet tilting, of pole shifts, of cataclysm that redrew the map of Earth and the course of humanity. What if Antarctica wasn't always the bottom of the world? What if, in a former alignment, in an age before this age, it sat in the temperate zone, lush, fertile, the final refuge of a dying world, a place where the last knowledge-bearers built one final monument, not to be seen, but to be sealed? Some theorists suggest a crustal displacement event, a sudden shift of Earth's outer shell could have moved Antarctica from a once habitable position to its current frozen throne, not over millennia, but overnight. Flood myths around the world speak of sudden storms, sky fire, and drowning lands. Perhaps this was not myth, but eyewitnessed. We imagine prehistory as primitive. But what if it was not the beginning of technology, but the aftermath of its loss? What if those who survived the last cycle chose to bury what they once had, not because they feared others, but because they feared themselves? In 2012, a radar scan detected what appeared to be a massive dome-shaped structure under the ice near the Princess Elizabeth Station, perfectly round, hundreds of feet wide. Artificial in symmetry, news trickled out, then vanished, just like the structure itself, swallowed again by snow, shadow, and silence. Even now, Antarctica is off limits. You cannot go there freely. Not as a scientist, not as a seeker. There are no permanent residents, only temporary eyes. And none are allowed near the deepest regions, not near the magnetic anomalies, not near the buried heat signatures, not near the structures we pretend aren't there. So we are left with echoes and with maps, because long before our satellites, someone saw what lies beneath. They mapped it, they preserved it, and they passed it on through scrolls, through stone, through silence. The Puri race map was not the only one. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531, the Boische map of 1737, both depict an ice-free Antarctic coastline, with rivers, mountains, cities, all drawn before the first ice core drill, before the first polar expedition, before the official discovery. These are not guesses. They are records, and records come from witnesses. If Antarctica was once green, once inhabited, then who lived there? What did they build, and why did they fall? Was it punishment? Was it protection? Was it prophecy? There are whispers of a library beneath the ice, of crystal archives encoded in temperature-resistant materials, of a seed vault of memory, not just human memory, but cosmic. And perhaps the greatest fear is not that we'll never find it, but that we already have, and someone chose to keep it buried. Some believe the pole is sacred, a planetary crown chakra, a node of celestial alignment. If so, who first crowned it? Who shaped the Earth's grid before we learned to draw lines? Who knew where to place a temple so cold it could survive the end? The ice is melting, and beneath it, secrets shiver, not from cold, but from awakening, because time does not erase all things. Some truths sleep like kings, entombed beneath crystal, waiting, and when the ice finally yields, when the continent is no longer locked in frost, what will we find? Stone, bones, light? Or something we were never meant to see again? Not everything buried was lost. Some things were sealed, and Antarctica was not always ice. Section 9. The sunken temples of Dwarka. Not all ruins crumble in dust. Some drown in silence. There are cities that were not defeated by war or time, but by water, not abandoned, but taken, and off the coast of India, beneath the tides of the Arabian Sea. One such city still whispers beneath the waves. They call it Dwarka, but the sea remembers a name older than that, a name sung by stars, etched into the bones of the earth, and drowned by the very gods who once walked among men. We were told Dwarka was only myth, that it belonged not to history, but to legend. A golden city built by the god Krishna, flourishing for a time, then swallowed whole when its divine purpose was fulfilled. It was a story, a metaphor, a poem in scripture, until 2001, until sonar scans beneath the Gulf of Kamhat revealed straight lines where nature draws none, pillars, staircases, a grid, a buried memory made of stone. Marine archaeologists, led by India's National Institute of Ocean Technology, descended into the murk, and what they found defied every textbook. Blocks of dressed stone, not natural, massive walls, rectangular platforms, steps descending into nothingness, ceramics, fossilized wood, tools carbon dated to 9,000 years ago. Older than the pyramids, older than Göbekli Tepe, older than history as we are allowed to know it. The city beneath the sea is not small. It spans miles, not a shrine or a ruin, but an entire metropolis. Wide roads, public baths, reservoirs, and grid-patterned layouts that suggest planning, intelligence, memory. And always the sea, pressing down like a second sky. The Mahabharata tells us Dwarka was built in a day by Vishwakarma, the divine architect of the gods. For Krishna, a warrior, philosopher, and cosmic avatar. It was a city of 99 gates, surrounded by water, lit by stars, singing with the voices of sages and kings. And then, one day, Krishna left, and the sea, as if mourning, swallowed his city whole. We were told it was allegory, but now we stand on the edge of a sunken reality. What kind of civilization builds so close to the ocean? What kind of culture places its temples at the edge of annihilation, unless they knew something, unless they were part of a cycle, a cosmic rhythm older than floodplains and fault lines, unless this wasn't their beginning, but their final chapter? The archaeologists call it a lost port city, but that phrase falls short, because what they've uncovered is not just a city, It's a challenge to the timelines, to the silence, to the curated story of civilization's slow rise from caves to cities, from savagery to science. Dwarka says otherwise. Dwarka speaks of memory, and memory, when it returns, rewrites everything. Satellite imagery has since revealed underwater features along India's west coast patterns too structured to dismiss. Stone anchors, coral-encrusted stairways, massive rectangular platforms now home to fish and coral, but once carved by hands. These discoveries are not alone. All across the globe, Unaguni, Bimini, Kuba's underwater megaliths, civilizations, are surfacing where the sea now reigns. We were told these were impossible, but perhaps it is not time that is wrong. Perhaps we are. Could the legend of Krishna have roots in a pre-flood epoch? Could he have been not merely a god, but a guardian of a dying age? One who walked among humans to preserve something sacred. Before the wave came, the Bhagavata Purana describes him not just as divine, but as one who guided an entire civilization, a keeper of knowledge, a knower of cycles. And when his task was complete, he left, and the ocean wept in response. There's a reason myth never dies, because buried beneath its symbolism is a fragment of something true, something too dangerous to speak plainly, too ancient to fully remember, too important to fully forget. Else lies beneath India's waters. Divers have only scratched the surface. There are whispers of submerged temples further south, off the coast of Tamil Nadu, where local stories speak of 7 pagodas built by giants, and 6 of them now lost to the sea. There are fishermen who speak of stone steps beneath the tides, of bell sounds echoing in the depths, of carved deities still standing beneath the weight of 1,000 years of salt. Why would an entire pantheon be tied to cities that no longer exist? Why would the divine make their homes in places destined to drown? Unless that drowning was the point, unless the sea is not the end, but the veil. A protective silence, a sacred forgetting, a test not to see if we can discover these places again, but to see if we still care to. Dwarka wasn't erased, it was hidden, not by men, but by time, by flood, by something that wanted this knowledge to sleep until we were ready. And we are only now beginning to remember. Sonar doesn't lie, carbon doesn't dream, stone doesn't shape itself, and the ocean doesn't keep secrets, unless someone asked. It too, the Gulf of Kamhad, is not just water, it is a mirror. And when we look into it, we don't just see the past, we see ourselves. A civilization once convinced of its own divinity, a culture that rose too far, too fast, and knew what was coming. And instead of fleeing, they built in beauty, they anchored their gods. They sealed their memory in salt and silence, because they believed, somewhere in the far tomorrow, we would dive deep enough to hear them again. So the question remains, did Krishna walk in Dwarka? Did gods once walk among mortals? And if so, where did they go when the sea came? Not all ruins are broken. Some are waiting, and Dwarka still waits beneath the waves. Section 10. Derinkuyu, the city underground, somewhere in the marrow of memory. We remember going underground, not as escape, but as instinct, as if the sky once betrayed us, as if light, once holy, became a threat, and so we burrowed, not to hide from nature, but from something older than fear. Beneath the honeycomb plains of Cappadocia, Turkey, lies a city without sunlight, a city so vast it spirals downward 12 levels deep, a forgotten cathedral of stone, carved not with tools but with purpose. Its name is Derinkuyu, deep well. But this was no ordinary shelter. This was a world below the world tomb. For 20,000 souls, wells that still run fresh, ventilation shafts as long as city blocks, massive stone doors, round and heavy, designed to seal entire corridors, not from weather, but from something chasing. There are escape tunnels, food, storage vaults, stables for animals, chapels, baptismal pools, places to pray in the dark, as if they weren't just hiding, but waiting. Archaeologists offer dates. They say the Hittites may have begun it around 1400 BCE. They guess others expanded it later. The Phrygians, the Byzantines, Christians fleeing, Roman wrath. But guesswork is not memory, and stone doesn't confess. Derinkuyu feels older, not just in age, but in design. This is not the frantic construction of desperate men. This is architecture born of foreknowledge, of repetition, of civilizations who had been here before and knew what was coming again. The tunnels descend like ribs through bedrock, narrow, deliberate, spiraling, impossible to invade in numbers, perfect for defense. Each level is deeper, colder, more silent, as if designed to muffle not just sound, but the presence of life itself. What kind of threat justifies this? What memory lives in stone-carved silence? Ancient local stories speak of those who came from the sky, not in wonder, but in warning. There are tales of times when the heavens burned and the ground was the only refuge. Some say the people hid from invaders. Others say they hid from beings who were not of this earth, beings who searched for something or someone, and that the underground cities were not just shelters, but sanctuaries, temples to survival, wombs of a second birth. Derinkuyu is not alone. More than 200 subterranean complexes have been discovered in Cappadocia, all carved from volcanic rock, all hidden beneath innocent fields and fairy chimneys, many linked by miles of secret tunnels. This wasn't one city. It was a network, a civilization beneath the surface. They say the first time you entered Derinkuyu, you feel the pressure in your chest, as if the earth is remembering for you, as if the walls want to speak but cannot. The stone doors are a mystery in themselves, circular, up to 1,000 pounds, impossible to move from the outside, but balanced so perfectly they can be rolled shut from within. No hinges, no handles, just silent guardians in the dark. There is one at the entrance of each level, one after another. It wasn't enough to go underground. They had to seal it. Each layer, a choice, descend deeper or risk the surface. What were they hiding from? Or more haunting, what were they hiding? Some believe Derinkuyu predates all written history, that it is a relic of the pre-flood world, a time when watchers still walked among men, when the sky opened not with rain but fire, when civilizations rose too high, too fast, and the earth, in grief or fury, reset the clock. And in that resetting, some remembered, some dug, some descended, not in panic, but in prophecy. Could Derinkuyu be a refuge from a cosmic cataclysm, an ancient ark carved not from wood, but from stone? Myths from across the globe speak of those who went into the earth to survive. The Hopi speak of the ant people who guided them to underground realms. Mesoamerican legends tell of inner worlds where the gods still dwell. In Vedic texts, the Patala is a vast subterranean kingdom ruled by beings both luminous and feared. These are not disconnected fables, they are fragmented echoes of one memory, broken into many names, and Derinkuyu may be the fracture point. Imagine a civilization so ancient it no longer needed writing because it spoke through architecture, through geometry, through placement, through absence. The silence in Derinkuyu is not emptiness, it is encoded, a language of pressure, a rhythm of turns and descents and sudden stillness. A story written in spatial logic, not ink, some believe. These cities were built by the Anunnaki, others by the survivors of Atlantis. Still others claim they are proof of a human race that reached unimaginable heights, then was humbled by what came after. But all agree we don't have the technology to replicate them easily today, not in size, not in placement, not in sheer planning across dozens of locations. These were not random caverns. These were intended spaces. The lowest chambers of Derinkuyu reach over 280 feet beneath the earth. That's more than 20 stories down, deeper than most modern buildings rise. Upward. And what lies in the deepest vaults is still largely unknown, unexcavated, unexplored, unspoken. There are rumors of sealed rooms, of petroglyphs on lower levels, of relics too delicate or too dangerous to bring to light. Some say the Turkish government has quietly restricted further excavation. Others claim what's left is simply too sacred to disturb. Why are we drawn to the buried? Because something in us remembers what it means to fall, to flee, to be hunted, not by predators, but by memories. Derinkuyu is not a city, it is a scar, a monument to a trauma so old the earth itself had to cradle the survivors. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't only surviving, maybe they were preserving knowledge, bloodlines, codes, seeds, a flicker of the flame that came before the flood, before the forgetting, before the story was rewritten by hands afraid of truth. Up to the stars, and forget that sometimes salvation comes from going down into silence, into darkness, into stone, because, in the end, we are not just the children of sunlight. We are also the children of those who once hid beneath it. Derinkuyu is, and if we listen closely, not with ears, but with ancestral memory, we might hear what still breathes in the depths, not the end of civilization, but its hiding place, the final prayer of an age too bright to survive. Section 11. The Oracle Stone of Baalbek. Not all oracles speak with voices. Some speak through silence, through gravity, through stone so vast it reshapes the air around it. There are places on this earth where time pauses, where scale disorients memory, where myth feels heavier than fact, because the stones are still there, and at Baalbek they have not moved, because they cannot. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon there lies a mystery carved from limestone and defiance, a single block called by some Hajar al-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing over 1,000 tons, larger than a space shuttle, taller than a 3-story building. Cut with such precision, it's as if gravity once obeyed a different law. But it's not alone. A second monolith rests beside it, heavier still. Another one was discovered beneath the same quarry, partially buried. weighing an estimated 1,650 tons. These are not broken pieces. These are not unfinished dreams. They are part of a deeper pattern. Baalbek was not built by chance. It was placed, aligned, weighted, anchored to something unseen. The Roman temple ruins atop Baalbek often draw the spotlight, columns towering over 70 feet high, stonework beyond imperial capacity, but they are the frosting, not the cake. Beneath them lies a platform, an ancient terrace of megalithic blocks, each weighing between 300 to 800 tons, laid with seamless joints, lifted without cranes, crafted in a time when no wheel, no pulley, no steel cable had yet arrived. This is not Roman, this is older, and the Romans knew it. They built atop it because they, too, felt its gravity. Some called Baalbek Heliopolis, the city of the sun. But long before that name, this place was whispered as a throne of giants, a landing place for gods. Local legends speak of watchers, beings not born of man, who descended in times so ancient. Even the stones had no name. They say Baalbek was a place where sky and soil made treaties, where matter was taught to bend, not a city, a gateway. The scale itself is the message. Why carve stones so massive that even modern machines strain to move them? Why bury them beneath Roman altars, as if to hide the original ritual beneath layers of conquest, unless the mass itself served a purpose, not as architecture, but as technology? Some believe the platform at Baalbek was a harmonic generator, that the stones were tuned, aligned to frequencies of the earth, a kind of terrestrial anchor for whatever once descended. The weight was intentional, not for strength, but for stillness, to hold something in place, energy, presence, memory, or perhaps revival. The name stone of the pregnant woman carries its own weight. Some say it refers to a local legend, a woman promised release from her pregnancy if she could lift the stone. But others see something deeper. Pregnancy is potential, creation waiting to emerge. What if the stone is a metaphor, not for fertility, but for a buried god machine, a dormant resonance chamber, a forgotten gate, a cosmic embryo waiting to wake? And why here in the Bekaa Valley? Because it is aligned. Baalbek sits on a powerful geodetic line, part of an ancient energy grid, ignored by modern maps but honored by every ancient builder. Temples, pyramids, megaliths, they speak to one another across continents, linked not by culture but by memory, a memory of Earth as a living system, a being, a body of vibration, charged and mapped long before compasses spun. The quarry itself tells a forgotten story. Whoever cut these stones, they knew something we don't. They didn't just lift, they released, as if the stone came undone from the mountain like a breath, as if they whispered to it, and it obeyed. Laser precision without lasers, no chisel marks, no cranes, just the stone, and the will to move the impossible. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss it all. They say ancient peoples used ropes, ramps, brute force, and endless slaves, but they never explain how the stones were maneuvered down slopes, through terrain, across uneven ground without splintering the rock or snapping bone. They offer theories, but never proof, because Baalbek doesn't need to be proven. It is there, and it does not fit. Even now, engineers stand in the quarry and shake their heads, not because they lack machines, but because they lack the why. Why build this way? Why go to such lengths unless the purpose required it? Unless the stones weren't meant to be seen, but to be felt, held in the bones, heard in the dreams, carried by those who remembered what the sky once opened to deliver. Some say Baalbek was built by the Nephilim. Others say it was the Anunnaki who brought kingship from the stars and built their altars into the bones of earth. Still others believe it was the remnant of a pre-flood world, a lost race whose ruins whisper beneath every continent. Forbidden. Not one answer, but a pattern, a disruption, a question too heavy to lift. And maybe the answer lies not in the stone, but in what it covers. Some have claimed that beneath Baalbek sealed chambers hum with energy, that the stones are not obstacles, but locks, and what they guard is not gold, not relics, but a frequency, a memory so old it can no longer be told, only felt. So Baalbek waits, heavy still, pregnant with meaning. The oracle is not a woman, it is a stone, and it does not answer questions. It asks them, why? Was it carved? Why placed here? Why buried beneath the altar of empire? And what would happen if it woke? Maybe some doors open upward, others downward, and a few only in the silence between. Baalbek is that silence. It doesn't echo, it remembers. Section 12. The timekeepers of Nabta Playa cross the skin of the desert, where wind whispers through nothing, and the earth forgets even its own name. A circle of stones watches the sky, not a temple, not a ruin, but a memory, frozen in the act of remembering. Before Stonehenge, before pyramids, before the histories we were allowed to know, there was Nabta Playa, beneath the searing sun of southern Egypt, where the Sahara sprawls like an ocean made of time, lies a place so quiet it feels older than silence itself. At first glance, it is barren, a flat expanse of ancient lakebed, cracked and bleached by millennia. But beneath the dust, a message, a circle, a calendar, a machine of stone that watches the stars. Not now, not recently, but 6, perhaps 7,000 years ago. Maybe more. They call it Nabta Playa, and it breaks the pattern, because it should not be here, not in this time, not in this place, not with this precision. It aligns with the solstices. It tracks the rising of Orion. It predicts not just seasons, but cycles. Flood, famine, fire in the sky, water beneath the earth. This was not simply a marker of days. It was a covenant between sky and soil. A map not of space, but of memory. The stones are not large, not like Baalbek, not like Sacsayhuamán, but they do not need to be, because size is not the only language of the ancients. Sometimes it is placement, it is stillness, it is knowing where to look. And those who placed these stones, they knew. They read the sky like scripture. They watched Orion rise in the pre-dawn dark. They followed Sirius, the dog star, as it heralded the return of rains and the death of worlds, long before pharaohs, before cuneiform, before the cities of Sumer drank light from the heavens. There were watchers, not priests, not kings, but timekeepers, and Nabta Playa was their altar. Modern scholars will say, here was a cattle culture, nomadic, primitive, stone herders of the Holocene. But the stones say otherwise. They are aligned to cardinal directions. They form astronomical sightlines, accurate not to folklore, but to celestial mechanics. They say it was a calendar, yes, but calendars do not build themselves. So who taught them? And more importantly, why were they watching the sky so closely It is not just the solstices. Nabta Playa aligns with the heliacal rising of Sirius, a star sacred to the Nile, to Isis, to resurrection. It marks the rebirth of the river and the drowning of the past. The Egyptians built temples to it, but at Nabta, it was already being tracked long before the dynasties formed, thousands of years earlier. This was not simple agriculture. This was survival, or warning. There are legends, not from Egypt, but from farther south, from the black sands and deep pastures of Inubaya, legends of the teachers, the first astronomers, those who came before speech was written, before kings had crowns, before the flood. They say these ones did not just observe the stars, they spoke to them, and in return, they were shown what was to come. Some researchers speculate that Nabta Playa warned of a great deluge, that it was a star map, yes, but also a countdown to a shift, to a memory so cataclysmic it shattered the world and turned men into myths. Could they have known? Could the circle of stones have held not just the rhythm of sun and season, but the trauma of a world about to drown? Consider the layout. 6. Upright slabs form a radial geometry, unmistakably intentional. Surrounding them, burial tumuli, stone-covered mounds, some containing cattle bones. Rituals, but not just for food, for passage, for remembrance, perhaps for offerings to the sky. This was not a campsite, it was a ceremonial axis, the navel of a vanished world view. And here is the great rupture in the story. Nabta Playa predates Stonehenge by nearly 2,000 years. It existed before the pyramids rose, before the ziggurats of Europe met, before writing named the gods. Yet it carries the same knowledge of the stars, of the cycles, of the eternal return. How? Who planted this seed of knowing in a time we call prehistoric? Was this knowledge born here or remembered? There is a pattern repeating from Göbekli Tepe to Nabta Playa, from the Andes to Angkor, of ancient places watching the sky, not for myth, not for beauty, but for warning, because what falls from above can drown a world. Fire becomes flood, stone becomes silence, and only the stars remain. Maybe Nabta Playa is not alone. Maybe it is a survivor, one among many timekeeping shrines built by a lost order whose true language was alignment, and whose message was never for their time, but for ours, because to watch the stars is to remember that nothing is permanent, not climate, not kingdom, not even memory. The desert tries to erase, but stone remembers, and the circle at Nabta Playa still points north, still leans toward Sirius, still whispers the math of resurrection. Maybe it is not a monument. Maybe it is a whisper, a countdown, a star map folded into bone. One day the sky will change again, the poles will drift, the constellations will realign, and a new flood will come of water or fire or silence. But the stones will still be watching, because someone long ago knew this world would forget. And now, as the wind moves across the old lake bed, and the stars rise again in their ancient rhythm, the timekeepers stir, not in flesh, not in voice, but in memory. Maybe we were meant to return here, to look again at the sky with the eyes of those who came before. Section 13. Akrotiri, the ash of Atlantis. There are cities we built to be remembered, and others that seem built to be forgotten. But some are not lost through time. They are buried, deliberately, as if the earth itself wished to silence them. Beneath the ash of a shattered island, beneath centuries of silence and soot, a ghost city waits. Its name is Akrotiri, and its echo may be older than history itself. It slumbers beneath the island we now call Santorini, but it once bore a different name. Thera, a crescent moon of stone, torn apart by fire. A volcano erupted here once, not in a whisper, but in a scream. A blast so violent it collapsed mountains, sent waves across oceans, and turned day into night. But long before that moment, before the fire, before the flood, there was a city, a world, perhaps even a memory we've tried to mythologize. Akrotiri, a city encased in volcanic ash, so perfectly preserved it defies the idea of ruin. Multi-story homes, painted in ochre and indigo, windows facing the sea, courtyards, bathrooms with running water, drainage systems more advanced than some possess today, frescoes that spoke in color and symbol of dolphins, goddesses, lilies, saffron gatherers, and sacred bulls. This was not a village. This was not primitive. This was something else. A civilization sculpted with elegance, designed not just for survival, but for beauty, for meaning, for something higher. They called them Minoans, though even that name is borrowed, coined long after their disappearance. And Akrotiri, it was no outpost. It was a jewel, a node in a network that spanned the Aegean, trading with Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant. And then, in the blink of a cosmic eye, it was gone, not through war, not through decay, but by eruption, by fire, by ash. As if something or someone decided it must be erased. And here, the myth rises like smoke. Plato wrote of Atlantis, a world advanced, arrogant, and radiant, a civilization that dared rival the gods. And so, he said, it was drowned. In a single day and night of misfortune. The timing is haunting. Plato wrote his tale around 360 BCE, but the eruption of Thera occurred over 1,000 years. Earlier, perhaps around 1600 BCE, he claimed Atlantis lay beyond the pillars of Heracles, but perhaps that was a mask, a misdirection, a myth wrapped in metaphor. Because what if he was not inventing a parable, but preserving a memory? What if Atlantis didn't sink beneath the Atlantic, but beneath the Aegean? The parallels are unsettling. Atlantis, a maritime power, advanced in technology, rich in culture, obsessed with divine ancestry. Akrotiri, a port city, deeply spiritual, technologically refined, filled with images of hybrid deities and seaborne symbols. Atlantis, destroyed in a single cataclysm. Akrotiri, buried suddenly, frozen mid-breath. And just like Atlantis, there are no human remains, no bodies, no panic, only stillness, order, as if they knew. It's as if the city had time to prepare, time to vanish, to hide what it knew, to erase what it once held. No gold, no sacred texts, no artifacts of obvious power, just paintings of dreams, walls that speak in ancient silence, as if what was valuable wasn't metal, but memory. Some say this city was abandoned just days before the eruption. Others believe its people were warned by rumbling skies, by trembling earth, by signs only the ancient skywatchers could read. Did they flee? Did they bury their truths before the end? Or did the sea claim more than just their homes? Did it devour what they were? And what if Akrotiri was never meant to survive? What if its disappearance was not an accident, but a necessity? What if its memory was too dangerous, too revealing, too illuminating? Because in these frescoes, in these patterns, in these geometries, there is something else, a thread, a code, a truth, too old for empire, too sacred for empire to protect. The architecture is geometric, not just beautiful, but harmonic, ratios that mirror musical scales. Windows placed not just for light, but for resonance, like other megalithic sites. Akrotiri seems to breathe with the cosmos, to hum with invisible frequencies. Was it a city or a sanctuary, or both? And always the bull, on fresco after fresco, not for sport, not for slaughter, but as symbol. The same bull that roamed the myths of Crete, the same bull venerated in Catalyuk, the same bull whose horns rose at Göbekli Tepe, a memory that spans continents, a god older than names. Why does it return? Why is it here? Perhaps Akrotiri was a node, a hub, a final outpost of a forgotten network, from the Levant to the Indus, from Sumer to the Andes, a culture older than Minoan, older than myth. And when the sky cracked, when the mountain roared, when the sea rose to swallow, that memory went with it, not lost, just layered. Ash over ash, century over century. Until now. And now the ash has thinned. The frescoes blink in the sun again. The staircases spiral in open air. The silence begins to speak. We look, but we still do not see. We measure the roads, but ignore where they point. We catalog pigment and pigment, but forget that color is a language. And the deeper question rises, not whether this was Atlantis, but why the earth keeps burying these places. Is it chance or choreography? Is destruction the price of remembering too much? Or is it the only way to pass on what can't be written? Maybe the ash is not just concealment. Maybe it is preservation, a sacred veil to protect something too fragile for time, a message only future memory could receive. And so we return, not as conquerors, not as scholars, but as fragments of something older. We walk streets they built for gods. We breathe the air of myths made solid. And we wonder, what if this wasn't a city that died? What if it chose to disappear? Maybe Akrotiri didn't fail. Maybe it fulfilled its purpose, to awaken the memory of a world that once remembered how to listen to stars, to symbols, to stone. And now, as the ash drifts like whispers and the frescoes blink beneath the sun, the story begins again. Not from the surface, but from the buried truth rising, one layer at a time. Section 14. The Harbor of the Gods. Heracleion. Some cities are born from stone, others from story. But a few, a sacred few, are born at the edge of worlds, where the river meets the sea, where the gods descend, where memory leaks into myth. There, beneath the waves, off Egypt's northern shore, lies a city that once stood at the very mouth of the Nile. Not Cairo, not Alexandria, older, quieter, forgotten. Heracleion, the harbor of gods, they called it. Thonis, in the native tongue, a name now barely heard in whispers. But the Greeks called it Heracleion, the place where Heracles first walked in Egypt, a city of passage and pilgrimage, where mortals came not just to trade, but to witness something divine. Here, where fresh water kissed the salt. The ancients believed the boundaries thinned between the sacred and the seen. For centuries, it ruled the delta. Before Alexandria rose, before the library burned, before history was edited by empire, this city shone. But then it vanished, not slowly, not gradually, it was there. And then it was not. For over 1,000 years, no map marked its place. No story could find its bones until the sea gave it back in the early 2000s. Divers working near Abu Qir Bay began pulling wonders from the deep, colossal statues, temple fragments, sphinxes, coins, stone sarcophagi, granite shrines, every piece telling the same story. There was a city here, and it was grand, and it fell. Heracleion once floated atop the currents of power, not just a port, but a portal. It welcomed ships from Phoenicia, Greece, Crete, Byblos. It carried grain and gold, papyrus and perfumes. But more than goods passed through its gates. Sacred processions, priest-kings, mystics, bearing divine relics, and above all, ritual. In the city's heart stood the Temple of Amengareb, massive, mysterious, built on artificial islands, woven by canals. Here, pharaohs came to receive their blessing. Here, gods were called to descend, and here, legend said, Heracles first touched Egyptian soil. But was it only Heracles? Because, as the statues rise from their salt tombs, they tell another story of gods far older, far stranger, far more foreign. Images of Osiris, god of death and rebirth, enthroned like a cosmic navigator, Sekhmet, lioness of flame, Isis, bearer of thrones, Ptah, shaper of worlds, but also hybrid beings, eyes that don't blink, symbols no longer understood. Some believe the rituals of Heracleion did not merely honor the gods, they invited them, a staging ground, a landing site, a harbor not just for ships, but for beings whose arrival carved civilization itself. The Egyptians wrote of it plainly. They said kingship descended from the gods. They named the Neteru not as myth, but as memory, and Heracleion, they believed, was where that descent began, and then it was gone, swallowed by the sea, not in a myth, but in the mud of reality, earthquakes, liquefaction, a shifting of tectonic plates. That's what we're told. That the land grew soft, the weight of temples too great, and the whole city slipped beneath the waves. But is that the only story? The disappearance was too sudden, the silence too perfect. No chronicles of survivors, no records of migration, just as if the city, its people, its gods, its truth, was removed with surgical precision, like something that had served its purpose, or something that had been seen by the wrong eyes. The statues of Heracleion are massive, some weigh over 5 tons. They were carved, lifted, placed with techniques no one today can fully explain. Why build something so enormous, so elaborate, only to lose it, unless they didn't lose it, unless it was offered to the sea, a sacrifice, a burial, a concealment. Layout of the city itself speaks in symbols, circular canals, geometry aligned with the stars. It was a living map, a model of cosmic flow, and like the temples of Abydos or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, it seemed designed for resonance with something not of this earth. So why has no school taught you its name? Why does no book of history hold it sacred? Because Heracleion was a beginning, and beginnings must be hidden when the ending is not yet ready. Its fall came before the library, before the crucifixions, before the conquests. It belonged to a time when gods still walked, or were remembered as those who did. And when that memory became too loud, the sea was called in to make it quiet again. The most haunting part, we found it. It rose again, and yet most still do not see. They call it a city, a ruin, a harbor, but Heracleion was a mirror, one that reflects what we lost, not just in stone, but in spirit. Its temples now rest beneath salt and silence. Its idols still gaze toward the surface, waiting not for worship, but for remembrance, because to remember Heracleion is to remember what we once believed, that gods were not myth, they were memory, memory made flesh, and when they walked the earth, they needed a place to land. Maybe that's all Heracleion ever was, not a city, but a threshold, a beacon, a door, and once opened, perhaps it could never be closed again. So the earth closed it, the water sealed it, and we forgot until now. Section 15, The Mirrors of Teotihuacan, is a place where the gods were not worshipped, they were made, where men walked in shadows of stone so vast, their own breath felt borrowed from the stars. A city older than the empires that tried to name it, older than the myths meant to explain it. Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods. But what did it mean to become one? They say it was built by giants. Others whisper it was never built, only uncovered, that it emerged from a time before, memory, when the sky was closer, and fire spoke in language. The city stretches like a celestial circuit, avenue of the dead, lined with temples that mirror constellations, pyramids that echo the sun, the moon, and something else, something forgotten, but it is not what sits above the earth that disturbs those who remember, it's what lies beneath. In 2003, a tunnel was discovered beneath the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, dark, sealed, unopened for nearly 2,000 years. It wasn't a tomb, it wasn't a chamber, it was a question buried in stone. And when they dug through the wet clay and sacred architecture, they found things that had no place in the known world. Mercury, pools of it, still liquid, still gleaming. Mica, a mineral not native to the region, brought in from distant mountains, layered into walls, lining the inner sanctum like insulation or calibration, and the orbs, spheres of gold and pyrite, perfect, reflective, unexplained. The mainstream tells us, ritual, that the ancients used these for ceremony, for symbolic resonance, for nothing more than belief. But mercury is not symbolic. It is toxic, it is volatile, and it reflects light, like a star reflects memory. Mica is not decoration. It is heat-resistant, electromagnetic. It belongs in machines, not myths, and orbs, buried at the end of a long, sealed tunnel, do not gather dust for ornament. They wait, like sensors, or witnesses. Who were the builders? Not the Aztecs. They arrived later, finding the city abandoned, yet perfect, so perfect they believed it was made by gods, so powerful they named it not for what it was, but what it did. A place where transformation happened, where men crossed a threshold, where something ancient lingered in the stone. But the mystery deepens. The entire city layout mimics a microchip. Its pyramids resonate at specific frequencies, and Mica appears again and again, as if the city itself was a device. Was Teotihuacan an energy center, a transmitter, a reflection chamber, tuning the soul like a crystal hums? Some say the mercury pools beneath the pyramid were not decorative, but directive, a liquid mirror, a reflective gate, a veil between realms. In alchemy, Mercury is the spirit. In Vedic lore, it is the seed of the gods. In ancient China, it was believed to grant immortality and death. What were these ancient architects calling down? What were they sending up? The tunnel itself is shaped like a descent into the underworld, sloping down, narrowing with intention. At the end, a chamber unlike any other, perfect symmetry, a false floor that hides no body, just the echoes of something sacred, something technical. And those orbs, why gold? Why pyrite? Fool's gold. Unless the builders knew something we don't. Unless these spheres weren't art, but memory, compressed, encoded, entangled, not treasure. Technology, ancient texts from around the world speak of mirrors, not just for seeing, but for traveling. Mirrors that showed the future. Mirrors that revealed gods. Mirrors that opened the sky in Mesoamerican lore. The god Tezcatlipoca carried a smoking mirror through which he watched and judged mankind. Was that mirror just myth? Or were these cultures remembering something very real, a device that could see through time or across realms? And if so, did the builders of Teotihuacan leave it behind, or hide it beneath layers of symbol, ritual, and ruin? We dig with shovels now, but once they dug with memory, with vision. And when they carved tunnels beneath their sacred pyramids, they weren't hiding death. They were housing transformation, initiation, reconstruction, ascension. The pyramid of the feathered serpent was not built in honor of a myth. It was a machine of remembering. Each step encoded geometry. Each stone vibrated with cosmic order, and beneath it, the mirrors of Mercury shimmered like portals, a reflecting pool for the soul. Or perhaps a window to another kind of sky. We don't know, but we feel it. Even now, Teotihuacan was abandoned. Long before its time, no battle, no invasion, no fire, just silence, as if the purpose had been fulfilled, or the risk had become too great. Perhaps the gates had opened too wide, or maybe they had glimpsed something in the mirror that man was not yet ready to become. Today, we walk its avenues like tourists, but every echo under our feet reminds us that this place was never for the ordinary. It was a forge, not of weapons, but of divinity, a crucible where light and shadow merged into transformation. Teotihuacan was not built to be lived in. It was built to become, and those who entered its depths may not have returned as they were. The tunnels were not just underground. They were inward. They were mirrors. And in those mirrors, something watched, something waited. So what are we really looking at when we peer into these ruins? Stones, history, a forgotten city? Or are we looking into the remnants of a technology so sacred it disguised itself as myth, so dangerous it buried itself in memory? Maybe that's what Teotihuacan truly is, not a city, not a shrine, but a mirror held up to us, waiting to ask the question no historian dares. What if they didn't believe in gods? What if they were building them? Section 16. The Serpent Walls of Ollantaytambo, the sacred spine of the Andes, where the mountains breathe memory and the sky still listens. There lies a place where stone does not behave like stone. It bends, it flows, it remembers. This is Ollantaytambo, not just a fortress, not merely a ruin, but a serpentine inscription in the land itself. And like all serpents, it hides its truth beneath the skin. To walk its terraces is to walk a staircase into another world, one not built for conquest, but for alignment. Walls curve like waves, corners refuse right angles, and in the seams between titanic stones, a secret language, slithers. Look closely. The patterns are not decoration. They move even in stillness, carved into pink granite and black andesite, snaking across retaining walls. Is a design so subtle it almost escapes the eye. The body of the serpent. Serpents in the ancient world were never just reptiles. They were codes, symbols of energy, of flow, of awakening and descent. They coil in the myths of Sumer. They undulate in the temples of Egypt. They rise with the Kundalini in the east, and here, in the high breath of Peru, they wind across walls no Inca could have moved, because some stones are older than empire. Adolantatombo. There are two histories, one carved deep beneath the other. The Inca built here, yes, but what they built upon was something far more ancient. Stones so large, so perfectly placed, that even today engineers fall silent. Some weigh more than 50 tons. Yet they rest in angles so precise, so fluid, that even a whisper of air could not slip between them and the source of these stones. Not local, they came from across the Urubamba River, from quarries kilometers away, up and down steep slopes, across ravines, no wheels, no pulleys, no cranes, just memory, and something we no longer understand. Some stones appear heat-altered, as if softened, shaped, then cooled. Others show tool marks, not of chisels, but of vibration, of frequency, and yet others? They are fitted, not placed, melted together, as if the mountain itself had chosen to close the gap. This was not Triolanderer construction. This was encoding. The serpent motif is not random. It weaves through Ollantaytambo as a map. Signal through time. Alignments with solstices suggest this was not just a city, but a calendar, a cosmic reflector on the solstice. Light moves across certain stones in ways that animate the serpent, scales lighting up, shadows forming the eye, not just art, not illusion, instruction. The serpent always represents more than one thing. It is duality embodied. It slithers between worlds. It sheds skin, dies, and returns. And in so many flood myths, the serpent survives beneath the waves. So what did the builders of Ollantaytambo know? What cycles were they charting? What memory were they encoding in stone? The terraces themselves are not simply agricultural. Some echo acoustic patterns, others amplify vibration. It is as if the entire city was tuned like a sacred instrument. We are taught to see stone as dead, but at Ollantaytambo, stone is alive. It coils, it pulses, it breathes with direction. It speaks in the language of resonance, a language no longer spoken aloud, but still felt in the bones by those who listen. The serpent on the walls is not a warning. It is an invitation. What if the stones were not cut, but sung? What if Ollantaytambo was not a fortress, but a frequency device, a place where thought, sound, and intention could reshape matter? This is not fantasy. It is memory, wearing the mask of myth. In the sacred valleys of Peru, elders still whisper of beings who could move stone like water, of gods who taught through vibration, not levitation, but resonance. And where did these beings go? Where they always go, into the serpent. In Andean mythology, Amaro is the great serpent, a cosmic being that connects the lower world, this world, and the sky. It moves through all things unseen, knowledge, water, dreams. Amaru is not evil, it is awakening. So when the serpent appears in stone, it is not a monster, it is a mirror. And it reflects something we have forgotten. Many believe Olan Tadumbo was a final refuge, a last stronghold of a world facing collapse. But collapse of what? Empire, climate, or memory itself? What drove them to encode knowledge into stones so heavy, so deliberate, they could not be moved without intention? Why build serpents that no one could see from above? Why shape blocks with geometry that seems almost fluid, unless it wasn't for the eyes at all, unless it was for the soul to awaken later? Much later. Now, today, we walk Olan Tadumbo with cameras and questions. We measure angles, we debate quarry sites, but the city does not answer. In data, it answers in rhythm. The way the wind moves across a serpentine wall, the hush between terraces, the strange warmth of stone under moonlight. It does not tell, it remembers, and it waits for us to do the same. There is no grand plaque, no inscription that explains, only the echo of a serpent etched into stone before. Names existed. Some say the serpent protects, others say it hides, but perhaps it is neither. Perhaps it is what remains when everything else is gone. A coil of memory, a spiral of time, a question carved into mountains, waiting to move again. Section 17, Yonaguni, the monument beneath the sea, beneath the surface, where sunlight fragments into silence. A shadow waits. It is not a shipwreck, not coral, not a tomb built by hands we recognize. It is older, colder, and it is watching off the coast of Yonaguni, where the Pacific brushes the southern islands of Japan. There is a shape that doesn't belong. It rises from the seafloor, not like nature, but in tension, massive, angular, impossible. Flat plains, sharp corners, terraces like steps leading downward or upward, depending on how deep memory is buried. Some call it the Yonaguni Monument. Others refuse to call it anything at all, because to name it is to confront a fracture in time, in science, in certainty. This is not erosion. This is not chance. The lines are too straight. The patterns too recursive, staircases cut in measured ascent, right angles stacked in cascading order. It is not how rock breaks, it is how a mind builds. What lies beneath Yonaguni is not just stone, but story, not just ruin, but resistance, a memory pinned to the ocean floor by weight and pressure and time. Divers speak of the feeling before the sight, a presence, as if something is remembering you, a vibration in the chest, a stillness in the current. Then the structure appears, emerging from the blue like a breath held too long. Mainstream archaeologists argue that it must be natural, that tectonic shifts and fractures could carve such symmetry. But symmetry is not meaning, and Yonaguni has meaning. Carved faces, halls, a platform shaped like a pyramid, channels that follow the sun, and what seems to be a throne set at the center, watching the abyss. Some stones bear marks, lines, and curves, etched not by pressure, but by precision, and nearby, stone tools, artifacts, hints, but never answers, because Yonaguni doesn't offer proof. It offers dissonance, a discordant note in the symphony of accepted history, and for some, that note is too loud to ignore. If Yonaguni was man-made, then it was built when the sea was lower, long before the last ice age surrendered to melt. That places it not 1,000 years ago, not 5,000, but possibly 10,000, or more before Sumer, before Egypt, before myth became mythology, a time when sea levels were rising, when memory was fleeing, when civilizations may have drowned, not because of war, but because the sky wept too long. The Pacific is a graveyard of memory. Micronesia, Lemuria, move whispers of lost lands that once stood above the waves and then slipped under. Yonaguni may be a remnant of one such place, a breadcrumb from a world that dared to dream before the flood, a city beneath. The sea is not merely a ruin, it is a reversal, an inversion of power, a reminder that nothing built stays untouched by time. What was it for? A temple, a fortress, a gate. Its form echoes purpose, but the purpose is veiled. Some suggest ritual, that the steps were for descent, not into water, but into the self, that the monument is not broken, it is waiting, that beneath the ocean lies not a ruin, but a mirror. In many traditions, the sea is the mother of forgetting. Everything she touches loses its name, but not Yonaguni. It resists erasure. It pulses beneath the waves like an unanswered question. It tells us not everything sunken is gone, not everything buried is dead. Some memories hold their breath for millennia, waiting for someone to remember what they meant. The sea did not simply rise, it took, and what it took were not just cities, but sequences, maps in stone, star alignments, the echoes of knowing, like Göbekli Tepe, like Bimini Road, like Dwarka. Yonaguni fits a pattern we are only now beginning to see. It does not belong in the timeline. It interrupts it. It corrects it. There is something humbling about finding architecture. Beneath the sea, it speaks of cycles, of pride drowned, of gods forgotten. The deeper we dive, the older the questions become, not who built it, but why. Why place such effort into stone so close to the sea's mouth, unless they knew it would one day be swallowed, and still built anyway? Because some messages are worth sending into the flood. Perhaps Yonaguni was a signal, a marker, a beacon set for the future, when we had lost enough certainty to begin listening again. Its geometry is not screaming for attention. It is whispering, softly, steadily, in the language of edges and angles, staircases and silence. And that whisper grows louder with every tide. Today, it rests in the deep, not alone, but connected to other anomalies, other disruptions, a net of memory that spans the globe beneath our feet. From the Andes to the Nile, from Göbekli to Japan, there is a pattern forming, but the pattern is only visible when we stop looking with permission. Yonaguni doesn't need us to believe. It only needs us to remember. Not everything ancient is gone. Not everything forgotten was meant to be. And the greatest temples may not be those we walk upon, but those we swim toward, those we find when we finally drown our doubt. Maybe the flood didn't erase the world. Maybe it archived it, and Yonaguni is just the first page being turned again. Section 18, Orichalcum, and the mouth of Atlantis. Some metals burn, some gleam, but some remember not in color alone, but in frequency, in tone, in echo. They are not mined, they are summoned. And one of them, the most elusive, was called Orichalcum. It was said to shine like fire, glow like dawn, resonate like a living thing, neither gold nor copper, yet holding something of both and something more. It shimmered with the breath of divinity, and in Atlantis they paved their temples with it, or so Plato wrote. For centuries it was dismissed, a poetic flourish, a philosopher's metaphor, a mythical medal for a mythical city. But myth does not arise from emptiness. It blooms from memory, and one day off the coast of Sicily, the sea gave something back in the shallow waters near Gela. Divers pulled ingots from the deep, dozens of them, red gold, mysterious, alloyed with copper, zinc, traces of nickel, lead, iron, but not ordinary brass, not modern, not accidental. They shimmer like something remembered, not crafted by chance, but by knowledge now misplaced. The archaeologists were cautious. They always are. An ancient alloy, they said, perhaps Phoenician, maybe Greek, maybe older. But those who still listened to the bones of the earth heard something else. They heard orichalcum, the metal Plato described as second only to gold, the soul of Atlantis. Plato wrote of a city that shone, walls clad in orichalcum, columns reflecting sunrise, temples singing in the breeze. Not metaphor, architecture, an alloy infused with the sacred, not just for beauty, but for energy. Was this not simply art, but technology? Ancient cultures remembered strange metals. From Egypt to the Indus, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, they spoke of elements that healed, that glowed, that sang. Some say orichalcum had harmonic properties, that it could resonate with the body, with the earth, with the stars. Others believed it held a frequency attuned to higher realms, that it wasn't merely mind, but given. Was this substance part of the lost science of the ancients, something that encoded frequency and form, a conductor of energy unknown to our age? Was it the blood of temples, the marrow of machines? The Atlanteans, if they were real, did not just build with stone. They tuned their cities to the cosmos, to the sun, to the memory of where they came from. The ingots near Sicily lie at the edge of a submerged shelf, a sunken coastline once part of a broader world, a shoreline that may have touched the edges of forgotten empires. If Atlantis once existed somewhere beyond the pillars of Heracles, then this is its throat, its mouth, the waters where its last words were spoken and swallowed. The sea holds its secrets tightly, but metals do not lie. They persist, they oxidize, yes, they tarnish, but they do not forget what they were forged to be. And the orichalcum pulled from the Mediterranean tells a silent story, one that glints in defiance of historical comfort. It tells us what we call myth was once memory. Why did so many civilizations remember a shining metal, one they could not replicate but could not forget? Why did they carve it into legends? Why did they give it to gods? Because the gods may have come from it or through it. What if orichalcum wasn't just a material, but a threshold, a miracle, a conduit, a bridge between realms? In the temples of ancient Egypt, in the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, in the obsidian mirrors of Mesoamerica, the same obsession returns: reflection, resonance, light trapped in matter. Orichalcum may have been part of a broader knowledge, a science of spirit and structure, lost in flood and filtered through myth, not magic, not superstition, but something older than both. And why was it lost? Maybe because it wasn't just rare, it was forbidden. Maybe the fall of Atlantis was not punishment for pride, but an erasure of power too great to be left behind. They didn't just bury cities, they buried capabilities, so that those who came after would have only ruins, not instructions. But the earth remembers, and the sea sometimes gives back what it was ordered to keep. The orichalcum ingots found near Sicily are more than an archaeological curiosity. They are a fracture in the carefully arranged illusion of linear history. They are a signal from a time when metals were alive, when matter and meaning were one. If we've forgotten how to shape orichalcum, maybe it's because we've forgotten how to listen to the frequencies of the old world, to the hum beneath the stones, to the metals that once held memory like a chalice. And if Plato disguised truth in story, it wasn't to deceive, but to protect, to ensure that only those who still remembered the language of myth would hear the truth within it. The mouth of Atlantis may lie not in one place, but many. 1,000 whispers, scattered across seabeds and scrolls, and this metal, this glint of impossible memory, is one of them. So the next time the sea returns something red, something gleaming, something that hums without sound, do not look away. It may not be gold. It may not be copper. It may be what we were never meant to find again. And if so, what else is waiting just beneath the waves? Section 19, Bimini Road and the Lost Path to Munat. All roads lead forward. Some lead back through water, through myth, through memory, and some do not lead at all. They beckon, not with destination, but with the echo of one. Such is the road beneath the sea, off the coast of Bimini, in shallow waters of the Bahamas. Just 90 kilometers from Miami lies something ancient and wrong. A line of limestone blocks, each massive, each resting with unnatural precision. They stretch like the remains of a causeway, submerged long before our calendars began. They call it Bimini Road. To some, it is a quirk of geology. Beach rock, fractured by erosion, stacked by coincidence. To others, it is a breadcrumb, a remnant of something vast, something gone, something buried on purpose, a lost land, a sunken temple, a path not of pilgrims, but of survivors. The locals speak of spirits in the deep, of ancestors who once walked across water before the waves claimed their cities, and the legends ripple further. Across Polynesia, they speak of a continent called Mu, a place that sank beneath rising seas, dragging its wisdom down with it. In the Andes, they remember Lemuria. In Egypt, a pre-dynastic age, when the gods walked and the Nile spoke with the sea, separate tongues, same sorrow. It was Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who first saw the stones in vision. He spoke of Atlantis rising again near Bimini. Around 1968, that same year, divers found the road. Coincidence or consequence? The sea does not forget, it only waits. Skeptics say it's nothing, just rock, just time, just erosion in tidy disguise. But the stones are too clean, their arrangement too deliberate. Some sit at perfect right angles, some curve like an ancient pier, some rest in double rows, as if once part of a platform or a procession. Underwater sonar reveals even stranger anomalies. Buried shapes, rectilinear structures, shadowy outlines beneath the sediment, not reef, not coral, not chance, but memory compressed in stone. What if Bimini was not a city, but a reminder, a marker of where something ended, a cairn to the fallen. Age of Mu. Mu, the fabled motherland of forgotten wisdom, said to stretch across the Pacific before the flood, before Atlantis, before history in ancient texts. Mu is described as a utopia of balance, temples of crystal, technology of vibration, a people attuned not just to stars, but to sound. They moved stone with frequency. They shaped land through harmony. And when the sky turned and the seas rose, they sank, but left songs in the stones. The similarities are to many, to synchronized, too loud to be random. Glyphs in Easter Island speak of a homeland beneath the sea. Tibetan lamas preserve chants of a sunken paradise to the east, and the Egyptians, in their oldest myths, mention the island of flame that fell before dynasties began. They all point in subtle turns to a memory with no name, or perhaps to many names. Mu, Lemuria, Atlantis, not separate myths, but shattered pieces of the same loss. And Bimini. Bimini is the breath between, not a city, not a ruin, but a whisper, the kind that trembles when truth is too ancient to speak. If we follow Bimini Road, not as stone, but as symbol, what do we find? A direction, not to a location, but to a forgotten capability, not a place lost, but a state of being erased. For those who built Mu, and perhaps Atlantis, architecture was not control, it was communion. They did not conquer the earth. They listened to it. Their cities did not rise against nature, they rose with it, aligned to solstices, echoed with songs, pulsed with magnetism. They didn't vanish, they were silenced, erased, drowned. The road at Bimini isn't just underwater. It's under denial, too aligned to be random, too ancient to be comfortable. We are told to look away, that it's nothing, that the past is settled, but memory doesn't settle. It surfaces. Satellite scans show more linear formations, sunken masses shaped like temples, pyramids, roads, not just in Bimini, but across the Caribbean shelf. Structures too deep for post-glacial man, too vast for coincidence. A sunken network, a drowned grid, or forgotten continent's skeleton. We must ask, if Bimini was the edge, what lay at the center? What cities now sleep beneath silt? What libraries dissolved into sand? And what truths, too dangerous for empire, were left out of every textbook? Maybe we were not meant to find this road. Maybe it was left for those who would feel it, not measure it, for those who still carry the imprint of Mu in dream, in blood, in longing. Some say the ancients disappeared, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they descended, not in defeat, but in design, to wait until the world was ready to remember. And now, as the seas rise again, as fault lines tremble, as weather forgets its patterns, maybe the road is beginning to lift, not in stone, but in consciousness. The lost path to Mu was never about where to walk. It was about how to listen, to silence, to story, to stone, and maybe, just maybe, to what lies beneath the sea's quiet breath. Section 20. The subterranean vaults of Malta. There are places where sound does not echo, it lingers. Places where the stone does not reflect the voice, it absorbs it, and when it returns, it is not the same. Malta is one such place. Not the Malta of beach shores and towers, but the one that sleeps beneath it, the Malta of the dead, of the remembered, and of those not meant to be remembered. Beneath the streets of Pala, beneath the feet of the living, lies a structure, not made for this world, not built with bricks or mortar, but carved from the earth itself. It is called Calcephaline hypogeum, a temple, a tomb, a womb, 3 levels deep, carved in a time before iron, before kings, before history had handwriting. What kind of people shapes chambers from living rock with such precision that a whisper becomes a weapon of spirit? In one chamber, the oracle room, if a man chants in the right frequency, his voice resonates. The bones, the frequency is 110 hertz, a tone that bypasses the intellect and speaks directly to the nervous system. It is not heard, it is felt. Modern studies show what the ancients already knew. Exposure to this frequency can induce altered states, disorientation, trance, visions, a direct line to whatever lies behind the veil. But this was not a happy accident of architecture. It was a ritual instrument. They did not build temples. They built transmitters for memory, for mourning, for something more. And yet, even this is not the most disturbing truth, because before the hypogeum was a museum, before the archaeologists came with brushes and notebooks, before it was sealed to the public, there were bones, thousands of them, stacked in the lower chambers, discarded, aligned, honored. No one agrees, but among them were skulls, not bound, not deformed by cloth, born long, cradled differently, shaped by bloodline. The Maltese government does not like to speak of them. The skeletons disappeared from the National Museum. Photographs exist, faded, denied. Some say it's a mistake. Some say it's a cover-up. But the shape of the skull tells its own story, a story of difference, of a people before us, of beings who may not have been fully human, or perhaps they were what we once were, before something changed us. So who carved the hypogeum, and who worshipped there? Was it the Neolithic peoples of Malta, or something far older, that taught them how? Because beneath the temple's artistry, beneath its spirals and altars, lies something else. Silence, a designed silence, a stillness so heavy it alters the heartbeat, a pressure that feels like being watched by memories that do not belong to you. Across the walls, spirals repeat. Red ochre still clings to the carvings, a color of blood, of ceremony, of continuity. No written language, no myths recorded. But the stone speaks in pattern, the language before language. Some chambers curve like ears, some ripple like ribs, some seem to vibrate without sound at all. The hypogeum is not a structure, it is an instrument, and perhaps also a vault. The word hypogeum simply means under earth, but the deeper implication is harder to name. A place to store what must not be lost, not only bodies, not only sound, but memory itself. This was not built in the image of survival, but of preservation, of something precious that could not be trusted above ground. The topmost level is simple, worn by time, touched by light, but go deeper, and the air thickens. The curves become intentional. The geometry impossible for a crude culture to guess, and at the lowest level, the bones once slept. Alongside them, water basins, not for washing, but for vibration, sound and liquid, stone and resonance, like some machine built to remember a frequency, lost to time. And then there's what happened after, in 1902. During early excavation, workers broke through into a chamber by accident. The site was sealed, forgotten. Some say explorers went missing within. Some say they heard voices echoing before any words were spoken, and once the chamber was mapped, visits were restricted. Today, most of it is closed, too fragile, they say, to sacred, perhaps. What does it mean that human consciousness changes inside its walls? What kind of people measured resonance instead of rulers? Why did they take sound so seriously, unless it was a bridge to something? And what walked those chambers before the bones were laid? There are theories, of course. Atlantean engineers, pre-Diluvian scientists, the sons of the gods, who came before the flood and taught geometry to mud. But perhaps the real answer is buried deeper still, not in myth, but in memory. A memory we carry in our bodies, the way we shiver at low frequencies, the way we remember in dreams places we've never seen but somehow recognize. Maybe we were there, not in form but in frequency. The elongated skulls, the lost tones, the carved womb beneath Malta's stone. None of it fits in history, but all of it fits in the feeling that once we were not alone, and not in the way we think. We were with something, guided, watched, remembered, but that age ended. The sound stopped. The vault was sealed, and the silence that remains is not empty. It is waiting, waiting for someone to speak the tone again, to unlock the shape hidden in the hum, to reawaken the memory that still vibrates through ancient stone. Because maybe they didn't bury the past. Maybe they tuned it into the earth, and maybe the hypogeum isn't a ruin at all, but a chamber of return, a place where the voice becomes more than speech, where sound becomes truth, where bones still listen, and if we can feel it, not with the mind, but with the marrow, maybe we haven't forgotten everything. Maybe something remembers us. Section 21. The Nineveh Codex and the Code of the Flood. There are moments in time when civilization does not fall. It kneels. As if bracing against a tide it cannot stop, not of armies, not of drought, but of memory, returning. Long before Genesis, before scroll or psalm, there was a vault of clay buried beneath the ruins of Nineveh. When it was found, it did not whisper history, it screamed prophecy. In 1849, British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard dug beneath the sands of Mosul, Iraq. What he unearthed was not just a city, but the royal library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria. Thousands of clay tablets, baked, pressed, preserved, a language older than Latin, older than Hebrew, but deeper than language, was what they held. Among them, a tale of a man named Gilgamesh, and within his journey, a flood, not a symbolic one, a world-ending deluge sent by gods, survived by one man chosen to build a vessel, to gather the seed of life, and wait for the waters to fall. It mirrored the story of Noah, but it came long before it, written on stone, not parchment, in Sumer, not Sinai. This was not coincidence. This was source, the memory of a cataclysm so great, it rewrote the sky and redefined the word survival. But the library held more than myths. Among the broken tablets, the fragmented syllables, and the strange glyphs that no longer fit translation were warnings, records of alignments, tales of sky, fire, and rising seas. Some believe these were not poems, but calculations, charts of cycles, of something returning. One tablet, partially translated, spoke of a dark body that passed through the domain of Anu, every great turning. Another referenced a flood, not from the rain, but from the deep rising. These were not just omens. They were equations written in myth's clothing. Because when language fails, symbols remember, and when civilization knows it will not survive, it encodes its warning in story. What if the Epic of Gilgamesh was not just allegory, but an archive, a memory disguised as adventure, a code of what came before and what might return again? For Gilgamesh does not seek power, he seeks immortality, not of flesh, but of knowledge. His journey leads him to the only man who survived the flood, Utnapishtim, the one who remembers what the world forgot. And what does Utnapishtim tell him? That the gods grew angry, that the heavens turned black, that the winds raged and the waters rose, and in a flash everything was washed away. But before it came, there were signs. The stars shifted, the watchers wept, the animals grew restless, a pattern, a loop, and when it returned, the wise did not fight it. They prepared in the deeper levels of Ashurbanipal's library, where the light could not reach. Archaeologists found star maps drawn not as art, but as calculations, zodiacal processions, planetary intersections, the timing of equinoxes across millennia. This was not mythology, it was astronomy, beyond the capability of their time, unless they were not the first. What if he inherited them, copied from older tablets, written in older scripts, from cities drowned and kings erased from stone? What if Nineveh's codex was just the last edition of a much older warning? In one recovered tablet, the phrase appears, again and again, the cycle will return. Not if, when. They were not trying to preserve power. They were trying to preserve memory, because they knew that memory is the only thing that can survive a flood. Not thrones, not even bloodlines, only the code. And what was the code? Not numbers, not glyphs, but pattern, encoded into myth, imprinted into ceremony, carved into temples, aligned to solstice suns and star-rising moons. The flood was not a single event, it was a cycle of forgetting. And each civilization knew it would happen again. Some believe there is a missing tablet, a keystone to the Nineveh collection, a map of procession encoded in divine parable. Others whisper that it still exists, hidden in vaults beneath London or the Vatican. But perhaps it never needed hiding. Perhaps it was always in plain sight. In every flood myth, every tale of sky falling, fire, every echo of Atlantis and Mu and Kumari Kandam, the memory is not gone, it's just dormant, waiting for the ones who can read between the words. The Nineveh Codex is not a book, it is a mirror. It does not show us the past, it shows us the rhythm. Rise, fall, remember, forget. Kings write laws in stone, but those who survive write warnings in story, because story survives the fire. It crosses oceans, it slips past the censors, and lodges in the bones of children who don't yet know what they remember. So, when we read Gilgamesh, we are not reading fiction, we are remembering the last time, the last storm, the last forgetting, and maybe the last chance. Ashurbanipal claimed to be the keeper of wisdom, the one who knew the secrets of antediluvian kings. But even he could not stop the fall. Even he, in all his glory, could not outrun the pattern. Nineveh was buried, Ashurbanipal forgotten, but the codex, it remains, etched in clay, cracked, but not broken, lost, but never silenced. We were meant to find it, not to read it, but to feel what it came from, the fear, the reverence, the urgency of a people who knew they would be forgotten, but hoped their warning would not. And maybe we are the generation it was meant for. Maybe the flood was not water. Maybe it was time, and maybe we are just beginning to remember what was always waiting to be heard again. Section 22. The spiral pillars of Lama Nuthir are places the earth still guards like a mother mourning what was taken, places not just hidden but sealed, as if the memory inside was too dangerous to leave open. Beneath the lush folds of Ecuador's clouded jungles, the caves of Lamana waited in silence, not buried, but forgotten on purpose, because some truths were meant only for those who remember how to listen. It began not with archaeologists, but with wanderers, those who follow echoes instead of maps. In the late 20th century, deep within the slopes of the Andean foothills, a network of subterranean caverns emerged. They were dark, crystalline, magnetic, and they did not feel natural. Their walls carried a charge, their air thick with something older than time. Inside, explorers found something no textbook could explain. A stone library. There were tablets, dozens, smooth, black, impossibly uniform. Engraved not with Incan glyphs, not with Mayan patterns, but with symbols unknown to the Americas. Some bore spirals, perfect Fibonacci whorls, radiating outward as if describing not art, but force. Others depicted continent shapes, some resembling South America and Africa, but others nowhere on Earth. One tablet showed 3 stars in a row, 3 points that mirrored Orion's belt, but placed over a map with no recognizable geography. Another bore a handprint with 6 fingers, not drawn, pressed, as if whoever made it left a mark of presence or ownership. The engravings were carved with a precision that modern tools would struggle to match, but with no evidence of metallurgy, chiseling, or abrasion. It was as if the stone had been reshaped with frequency, and then the spirals, carved. Pillars embedded in the chamber floors, each etched with tight, winding grooves. They weren't decorative. Vibrated. Some emitted low hums when touched. Others responded to sound echoing tones from the human voice, as if tuned to the body's inner resonance. The caves didn't just hold relics, they responded to presence. Researchers later confirmed that several of the artifacts contained magnetic anomalies, not enough to point a compass, but enough to distort sensors. Satellites flickered above them, recording equipment glitched near them, and among the artifacts were metal spheres that did not match any. Native metallurgy. 1 contained a liquid core that pulsed when exposed to heat, a kind of primitive capacitor or ancient storage device. But what was it storing, and for whom? There were no remains, no tools, no pottery. No trace of civilization, except the message, as if this was never a home, never a temple, but a vault, a place built not to be lived in, but to survive something that wouldn't. Mainstream scholars dismissed it. They had to. It didn't fit. Not with the Olmec, not with the Inca, not with the timelines we're taught to worship, because the stone tablets of Lamana aren't just older, they are impossible. They don't echo what came before. They suggest something else entirely, something that came before all of it. Some believe they were remnants of Atlantean exiles, survivors of a cataclysm who scattered across the globe, burying fragments of their science, waiting for a time when the world could remember them without fear. Others see them as warnings, as memory markers, designed to be found only if we ever stood on the brink of forgetting ourselves again. Why spirals? Because a spiral doesn't end. It folds back upon itself. It marks a cycle of rise, of fall, of awakening, of amnesia. They did not build pyramids. They did not raise ziggurats. They carved resonant equations into the bones of the earth. One of the tablets bore a carving of two serpents intertwined, not in combat, but in balance. Some interpret this as the Kundalini, others as a cosmic binary, sun and moon, life and death, memory and forgetting, and between them, always the spiral, a third force, the path that remembers when the others forget, and the question that still burns: who hid them? Was it their makers, foreseeing their own extinction, or was it someone else who wanted them gone? Because this is what echoes through the jungle. The caves of Lamana were not open, they were sealed, deliberately, with stones placed to block passage. As if not just time, but fear was the architect. Fear of erasure, fear of desecration, or maybe fear of what we'd become when we no longer knew where we came from. And yet, they left them anyway. Not in cities, not in temples, but in darkness, waiting beneath vines and moss for the curious and the forgotten to find their way home again. This was not archaeology. It was invocation. The deeper the explorers went, the more the air thickened. Some reported dreams in the caves. Others claimed they heard voices, not speech, but memory, unspoken. We may never know who built the spiral vaults of Lamana. We may never be meant to, because they weren't left to explain. They were left to awaken, and now they are awake. The spirals have been touched, the maps have been read. The resonance is stirring, not just in the earth, but in the minds of those who've always suspected that history is hiding something, not by accident, but by design. Maybe that's why it was hidden, because the tablets don't just tell of a forgotten age. They remind us what was once possible and what still might be. A world in tune, a world of sacred geometry, of resonance, of encoded memory, a world that didn't fall but was pushed below. And so the spiral turns again. We have touched the cave, we have heard the tone, and now the question rises: what were we meant to remember before the silence was broken? Section 23. The tombs that were never meant to be found. Some structures are not built to be seen, not meant for the sun, nor for the breath of the living. They are built for silence, for memory too heavy to speak, for something that must not be disturbed. Not every tomb is a resting place. Some are warnings, and some are seals. Beneath the sands of Saqqara, just beyond Egypt's oldest pyramid, lies a descent no one fully understands, cut into bedrock, twisting, plunging, narrowing. A cavern of cold geometry opens. Inside, the Serapeum waits, 24 black sarcophagi, each weighing over 70 tons, each carved from a single block of granite, so pure it reflects the light like obsidian. And inside them, nothing, no bodies, no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, just stillness, as if the very act of sealing them was the only message that mattered. Egyptologists once said they were for bulls, sacred APIs, bulls, symbols of strength and resurrection. But bulls do not need boxes that defy explanation. They do not need magnetic containment or granite so dense it vibrates with a subterranean hum. No, these were not tombs, they were chambers. not to honor death, but to contain something ancient and perhaps still alive in some way. Granite is not chosen by accident. It is a conductor of energy. It hums with piezoelectric tension. It remembers pressure, and when placed underground, beneath layers of limestone and earth, granite becomes a battery for memory. So what were they containing? A force, a relic, a truth too dangerous to rise again. They are not alone. Thousands of miles away, beneath the red soil of Xi'an, China, rise pyramids forbidden to the public, covered in trees, erased from maps, guarded not by myth, but by law. Among them stands the mausoleum of the first emperor, but no one has ever entered it. Why? Because, deep within its core, the ground still leaks mercury. Ancient texts claimed rivers of mercury flowed through its chambers. A model of the heavens stretched across its ceiling. The emperor believed he could rule the next world by recreating it beneath his feet, but maybe he wasn't building for himself. Maybe he was sealing something in. Even modern sensors refuse to pierce the tomb. The government won't allow excavation. Archaeologists are told to stay away, and mercury is more than a metal. It is a conductor of vibration, a mirror between worlds, a liquid memory. A veil, back in Egypt, beneath Dendora, another chamber pulses in silence. An underground crypt, a sealed vault known for one thing: it resonates. When certain tones are sung inside it, the walls respond. Not symbolically, literally. The sound bounces, multiplies, shifts. Some say it enters your bones. Others claim it distorts time. But the purpose of the chamber has never been found, because it was never meant to be entered. We keep calling these tombs because that's the only word we have. But burial chambers honor the dead. These places evade interpretation. They were not made for the dead. They were made for what could not be allowed to die, or could not be allowed to return. Some researchers have pointed to the Serapeum's lid. Stones, how they are too large to be lifted, even with today's cranes, they ask. How did ancient builders lower them with such precision? In absolute darkness. Others note the magnetic distortions measured in these chambers. Compass needles spin, cameras fail. Voices feel distant, as if time is stretching thin. Could these sarcophagi have been built to absorb frequencies, to trap energy, to bind something not with chains, but with geometry and tone? If so, what kind of knowledge would instruct a civilization to hide such things from the world? And more haunting still, why does that instinct repeat across cultures? In South America, beneath the mountains of Peru, tunnel networks stretch for miles, with doorways carved into stone cliffs that led nowhere. One such portal, Aramu Moru, stands at 7 feet tall, shaped like a gate, perfectly smooth, unfinished. They say abandoned, but the local shamans call it Porto de los Dioses, the gate of the gods. They say it does not open with hands, but with vibration, and it leads not to death, but to what must remain sealed. What were they protecting us from? Or more disturbingly, what were they protecting? Not a corpse, not a treasure, but a pattern, a pulse, a knowledge so vast, so volatile, it needed to be held beneath the skin of the earth, because it could return, because it never truly left. We call it architecture, we call it burial, but these were locks, and the world around them, the keys, when aligned with stars, with solstices, with the movement of the heavens, Perhaps they opened, or perhaps they sealed tighter. And if one were to unlock, what would we find waiting inside? An ancient voice, a forgotten memory, or the consequence of curiosity too blind to tremble? Some truths are not erased. They are buried in silence, entombed not for honor, but for containment. And if these chambers were never meant to be found, why are we now discovering them? Why now? Why us? What has shifted in the rhythm of the world that the seals are stirring? Maybe these aren't tombs. Maybe they're not monuments. Maybe they're the last lines of defense from a world we no longer remember, but once knew far too well. And if we are the ones who open what was never meant to breathe again, then the next age may not be built in stone. It may be built in consequence. Section 24. When time froze, the mystery of Mohenjo-Daro cities fall in fire. Others fade with drought, decay, or conquest. But then there are those that stop, not slowly, not with warning, but all at once, as if time itself took a breath and forgot to exhale. Mohenjo-Daro is such a place, and the silence it left behind still hums in the baked earth of the Indus Valley, where dust carries whispers older than kings. A city once thrived. It was no primitive settlement, no chaotic sprawl. Mohenjo-Daro, Mound of the Dead, was a world designed with impossible foresight. Gridded streets, multi-story homes, underground sewage, private wells, as if its architects knew the flow of human life and mirrored it in stone. But perfection can be a mask. And this city, this marvel, would not die like others. It would vanish. There are no charred gates, no weapons strewn in panic, no toppled walls from foreign assault. Instead, skeletons, frozen in streets, lying hand in hand, faces turned upward, not buried, not ceremonially arranged, just dropped, as if something unseen swept over them and extinguished motion in an instant. Some bodies show no trauma. Some seem mid-step, as if running from nothing, or from something so vast, so sudden, that even memory fled before it. Archaeologists found something stranger still. Radiation traces clung to the ruins, anomalies baked into the stone. There were bricks fused together, not melted by fire, but by flash heating, temperatures reaching over 500 degrees Celsius, more akin to atomic phenomena than anything the Bronze Age should know. Stones turned to glass, surfaces vitrified. Some dared whisper a terrifying word, blast. But how could this be? How could a prehistoric civilization, with no known weapons, no known enemies, no known collapse, bear the signature of destruction that resembles modern nuclear impact? Was it accident, or was it memory, a myth the earth remembers, but we forgot? The ancient Sanskrit texts of India speak of terrible weapons. In the Mahabharata, a war unfolds between celestial powers, the Devas and Asuras, and there, hidden in poetic verse, is a passage few dare read aloud without trembling, a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose with all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death. Is this just mythology or encoded memory? We want to separate myth from fact, but perhaps they were never separate. Perhaps myth is the language of memory, and Mohenjo-Daro is what happens when that memory returns in fire. There are no known texts from Mohenjo-Daro itself, no carved proclamations, no funerary stele, only seals, strange symbols that no one has fully deciphered, as if the city spoke in a code never meant for us, or worse, a code meant only for those who remembered what ended it. The city lies in layers, multiple rebuilds, multiple timelines, but always the same plan, the same grid, as if they were trying again and again, each version closer to something, or further from a warning, then suddenly nothing, as if the attempt was abandoned, as if the lesson came too late. Some theorists whisper of a war between worlds, not nations, not empires, but between forces higher than memory allows. A forgotten epoch, pre-flood, pre-record, where the gods did not watch from afar, but walked. And when their quarrels spilled into our plane, entire cities became collateral. Even Oppenheimer, father of the modern atomic bomb, was once asked whether the Trinity test was the first nuclear explosion. His reply, yes, in modern times. What did he mean? What did he read that we were not meant to? The region around Mohenjo-Daro remains sensitive. Excavations are cautious. Many sites have been left unstudied or quietly covered again. But the questions linger. Why do similar patterns appear across the ancient world? Glass-like surfaces in Scotland's vitrified forts, radiation in Rajasthan, destruction by heat in Sodom and Gomorrah. Are we chasing shadows or following a thread woven through the ages by hands we can no longer name? Even today, the air around Mohenjo-Daro feels wrong. Locals avoid it. Legends say the place is cursed, that the land remembers, not in story, but in vibration, in the way sound falls strangely quiet, in the way wind refuses to pass through certain alleys, as if time is still holding its breath, still afraid. We look at the city as ruins. But maybe it was never truly finished. Maybe it was interrupted by what? A weapon, a rupture in the sky, the return of a force they once knew. Or did they unlock something, an energy, a sound, a light that humanity was not ready for? It's easier to dismiss, to bury it again, to call it coincidence, anomaly, misunderstanding. But every now and then, a skeleton falls just slightly outside the accepted timeline. A radiation reading defies calibration. A piece of glass is found where no fire should reach, and the pause returns. The pause that swallowed Mohenjo-Daro. What if time did not just pass over this place, but fractured here? What if the city still remembers what we are trying to forget? And if we stand long enough in its streets, if we press our palms to its sun-baked bricks, maybe we will hear it, that moment when everything stopped, not with an explosion, but with a silence that still waits to be broken. Section 26. They will come looking again. Everything buried is eventually uncovered. Not because time reveals, but because forgetting is never permanent. Across eons, the ground does not guard secrets forever. It breathes, it shifts, it exhales, and what was once silenced always finds its way back to the surface, not intact, not whole, but enough to whisper again. Somewhere beneath the ruins we now unearth lie the ruins of our own making, and somewhere ahead, long past the edge of what we call now, another hand will dig through our dust, not with our language, not with our gods, but with the same ache, the ache to know who were they and why did they fall. Civilizations do not disappear, they are overwritten, they do not end, they are palimpsests, scraped, clean, rewritten, then forgotten again. Stone becomes sand, steel becomes rust, satellites fall into the sea, and what was once sacred becomes scenery. We think ourselves advanced, but so did they. Rome believed it was eternal. Babylon reached for the stars. Atlantis lit its cities with a light that was never fire. All believed they were the end of history, but history has no end, only intervals between remembering one day. Long after our cities have drowned, long after the last server blinks dark, long after the satellites fall like dying stars, someone will come walking through the bones of what we left behind, and they will wonder. They will find our great towers, cracked and swallowed by vines. They will find our machines, silent and corroded beneath the ashdot. They will find the strange latticework of cities, grids carved across a wounded planet. They will see the scars, but not the hands that made them. And they will ask, who built this? What did they worship? What ended them? They will find our bones. They will label them modern. They will guess at our tools, debate our art, misread our language. They will find our ruins. But they will not find us, not the memory, not the madness, not the miracle, because what we truly are does not fossilize. We think we are discoverers, but we are already being discovered. Every fragment we uncover from the ancient world, they are mirrors, not maps. They do not just show us then, they show us ourselves, our fears, our arrogance, our unfinished remembering. And so we must ask, what will they say when they stand in the shell of our age? What myths will they invent to make sense of our collapse? Will they believe in a golden age of global power and divine machines? Will they name our satellites, chariots, our reactors, altars, our ruins, temples to invisible gods? Perhaps they will say we fell because we lost balance, because we divorced the sky from the soul, because we made towers but forgot foundations. Or perhaps they will not speak of us at all. Perhaps we will become what we fear most, an erasure. Civilizations are not ended by disaster alone. They are ended by disconnection, from myth, from memory, from meaning. And when that thread is cut, when the old songs stop being sung, the collapse has already begun. Even if the lights are still on, we live as though the future is a destination, but it is a mirror, and time, in its quiet vengeance, shows us not progress, but pattern. Build, ascend, forget, fall, repeat, each age. Convinced it is immune, each convinced it is the first, or the last. But time does not remember winners. It remembers rhythms, and the rhythm we hear now, deep beneath the noise of civilization, is the same one the ancients heard before their silence. The low hum, the soft warning, the call to listen. Before it is too late, we are not just the ones who remember, we are also the ones who will be remembered, or misremembered, or mythologized, or erased. We are someone's mystery. We are someone's puzzle. We are the echo that someone else will chase through the dust we leave behind. They will find our warnings, carved in data, etched into concrete, encoded in the last language we thought would last. But will they understand? Did we? We think legacy is in monuments, but legacy is in memory. And memory is fragile, more fragile than stone, more fragile than fire. It must be passed hand to hand, soul to soul, dream to dream, or it fades, like a name no longer spoken, like a city no longer mapped. We want to be remembered, but are we worth remembering? What myths are we writing now, not with books, but with choices, with the poison in our rivers, with the hunger in our skies, with the silence in our hearts? Will they call us wise or blind, sacred or sacrilegious? Will they envy us or pity us? The ruins we uncover are not just from the past. Some are from futures that never made it, possibilities that fell short, warnings that hardened into stone. We think we are climbing, but maybe we are circling. Maybe we've been here before. Maybe they, the ones we seek in the sands and the stars, were once like us, curious, proud, forgetting. And maybe they, too, knew their time would end. Maybe they, too, whispered across the centuries, they will come looking again, not because they know us, but because they, too, are lost. Not because we mattered, but because the search is what always returns. And when they do come, when they stand over our broken roads, our silent cities, our sunken monuments, they will ask the same questions we have always asked. Who were they? What did they know? And why did it end? And maybe, just maybe, they will hear the same whisper. We now follow through the dust. Everything buried remembers.